One clear day, in the courtyard of a multi-story university, two boys were deciding where to have lunch. One of them was Ji Hoon. Ji Hoon said that it was hot outside, so it would be better to eat in the dining hall. People were bustling around, and suddenly two girls ran up to him and started telling Ji Hoon that they really liked his lecture today, and it would be cool if he was their teacher's assistant next semester. The girls invited him to have lunch with them because a new restaurant had been built on the far exit. Ji Hoon apologized and said that they could have lunch another time because he and Chang-soo were going to the cafeteria now. Everyone around him was delighted with Ji Hoon, and his friend remarked that he was a hit today because Ji Hoon was tall, handsome, smart, and had a kind heart, and even the boys were delighted with him. Chang-soo, with a happy smile, told Ji Hoon as he waved goodbye to the girls that he was making promises to everyone to have lunch another day, and it seemed like he was taking up his time. In the schoolyard, Ji Hoon could be heard asking Chang-soo not to say that, because he was already uncomfortable, and Chang-soo was surprised and told him to enjoy his popularity. Without turning to him, Ji Hoon agreed, because who would have thought that the guy who was attractive to almost everyone in school had become a young father? The embarrassed hero tells us about himself. His name is Kim Ji Hoon, and he is not used to being the center of attention all the time, because... In the corridor of the university, the boy bumped into a man, apologized frightened, to which the man with glasses and a can of some kind of drink replied that it was nothing to worry about. Walking further down the hall, the guy asked the girl in surprise who this new employee was, and the girl replied that he was a student, working in Professor Chan Dong-ho's research lab, and he was a teaching assistant in the last class. The guy was surprised to hear that he had been in the class, but he didn't remember the assistant at all. Ji Hoon, sipping his drink, told Chang-soo that Professor Chan had blown his mind. Not long ago, he was a small man, invisible, an ordinary student who combined work and study and was constantly tired. Once again, Ji Hoon is in the university courtyard with Chang-soo as they discuss a place to eat lunch. Chang-soo continued to praise him and ask how he had achieved such a change, to which Ji Hoon replied in embarrassment and surprise that he hadn't done anything. In fact, he doesn't know how it happened, because there is no scientific explanation for it. When Ji Hoon and Chang-soo were standing by the stairs, they heard people talking to a girl, saying that she was very cute, just a doll, not a child, and asking if she was waiting for someone. A girl with very pretty hair rushed up the stairs, shouting the word daddy. Ji Hoon grabbed the joyful girl in his arms. One thing he could say for sure was that all the changes in his life had begun the very day he first met his daughter, his precious beloved baby with big eyes, a joyful smile, and a big butterfly on her dress, Kim Jong-il. In one of the windows of the high-rise building, someone could be heard telling someone to wake up. The tinkling voice tickled my ears. In the room, which was flooded with the morning sun, someone's voice was heard saying that it was time to get up. It was morning. Was it really a dream? Surprised, Ji Hoon lay in his bed with his head wrapped in a blanket. The voice continued to say that his mom always said, the early riser gets the best of the morning, and his dad was a sleeper. Stunned, Ji Hoon jumped out of bed, because he did not understand who was calling him dad. A little smiling girl with big eyes told him to wake up because the sun was already up. And suddenly Ji Hoon remembered that yesterday he had suddenly found his daughter. He laughed sitting on the bed, because it was not a dream, and now he had to take care of the child. The little girl climbed onto his bed and called him to eat with a beaming smile. Sitting in the cafe, Ji Hoon thought that he never could have imagined that this would happen to him. As he sipped his coffee, he thought about quitting, because he was just an ordinary college student, tired of looking for a job and a steady income. Angry, Ji Hoon said that he had put up with the antics of that old bastard of a professor for a long time, but this was too much. Suddenly, the phone rang, and Ji Hoon picked up the phone and said hello to his mother. He repeated his mother's question about what he was eating and answered why she thought that a grown man couldn't cook for himself, saying that he was eating well and that she shouldn't worry. When his mother asked him the next question, Ji Hoon began to answer angrily, saying that he had already said everything on the subject, because he still needed to complete his master's degree to get his specialty. Suddenly, he stood up and slammed his hand on the table, and the people in the cafe looked at him in surprise. Ji Hoon began to speak angrily about how if he quit his studies now, no one would hire him later, because big companies don't hire just anyone. Ji Hoon got up from his desk, picked up his clothes, and continued to talk to the shouts of the visitors. He angrily told his mother that he had already been annoyed with the professor today and asked her to at least stop nagging him. He angrily put the coffee tray on the table and left the cafe. On the street, he continued to ask her angrily why she thought he didn't want to look for a job because he didn't want to work, or that he was having fun working in college. His parents' tuition money ran out sooner than he expected, and so Ji Hoon had to take time off from school to earn some money. 6 years later, he was finally able to graduate with a bachelor's degree, but the professor said that in order to get his specialty, Ji Hoon had to complete his master's degree. It wasn't that he persuaded him, but somehow, he managed to finish his master's degree, and then suddenly it turned out that he had to get a PhD to be able to teach. Ji Hoon continued his angry conversation with his mother. He said that he needed to find a stable job to somehow fix his affairs and his nerves, because he still had to defend his PhD. Ji Hoon stopped to look at his phone and said that he was so irritated because of the stress. Then he turned to his mom, apologized and said he was in a bad mood, thanked her for taking care of him and said goodbye. Everyone wants a good life, but he can't even provide for himself. So all these things are unattainable dreams for him. Ji Hoon looked at his phone again and dialed someone's number. Walking down the street, he asked the person he was talking to what he was doing and if he was busy. It was Friday, so the man suggested going out to eat and drink soju. The morning sun was shining down on the room and the bed Ji Hoon was lying on. It seemed that he had had too much to drink last night. He was lying there, dying of a headache, when suddenly the bell rang and Ji Hoon pushed himself up on one elbow. His level of irritation began to rise, thinking it was just another salesman showing up on a Saturday morning. After 5 minutes, Ji Hoon's irritation level began to rise, because the person standing outside his door had not gone anywhere. He got out of bed with some mockery, because this someone was very annoying, and because of this, his irritation level continued to rise. Ji Hoon put one foot off the bed and was struck by the desire of the salesman, who he thought was behind the door, to sell him something. When he opened the door, his irritation level was already at an all-time high, and he angrily began to shout at the girl standing behind the door that he didn't trust anyone and wouldn't buy anything. The girl with the big eyes and the butterfly on her dress seemed a little upset by this reaction. When Ji Hoon realized who he was looking at, his level of irritation dropped to 0, his face became very joyful, and it should not be hidden that he was eager for various niceties. He began to ask what had happened and who had let her walk in just one dress in such a cold weather. The girl was silent and just looked at him. She was carrying a large suitcase behind her back. Then Ji Hoon, somewhat embarrassed, decided that she was lost and that he should report it to the police. After some silence, the girl said only one word, "Dad," with curiosity in her voice. Ji Hoon stood there for a moment, the word "Dad" running through his head several times. Then he said, embarrassed, that she had probably lost her dad, and that he just looked like him. The girl replied that Ji Hoon was her father. Confused, Ji Hoon did not understand what she was talking about. He began to explain to her that he was not her father. He began to say that she was still young and probably did not know, but uncles and aunts usually get married and have children, and he was not married. The girl interrupted him with a denial. Ji Hoon was desperate. He asked who her mother was. The girl curiously replied that her mother's name was Yona. Bayona. The man was stunned to hear this name. Bayona was from Jugong's first corps, a beautiful slender girl with brown hair that blew in the wind. 7 years ago, he went on tour with Yona, and they actually slept together. But after that, she suddenly cut off all contact, and now this girl claims to be his daughter. While Ji Hoon was thinking, the girl picked up his phone, which he had accidentally dropped and didn't even notice. She said that her mom asked him to call her when the girl came to see her dad. While Ji Hoon leaned against the wall in despair, thinking only that this could not be true, the girl dialed the number and told her mother that she had already arrived, and of course nothing had happened because she was her daughter. Then she told her mom that her dad was there and she would put him on the phone. A dazed Ji Hoon turned to the girl when she said that his mother was asking him to use the phone and picked up the phone with a calm expression. He heard Bae Young's voice on the phone, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time and asking how he was doing. Ji Hoon was shocked that it was really Bae Yona. As the little girl sat on the suitcase behind Ji Hoon and swung her legs, he began to bombard the woman with questions. He didn't understand what was going on, why Bae Young hadn't told him she had a child, and even began to suspect that it was a prank. Bae-young was outraged and told him to be careful what he said, because Cherin could hear him. She was not a little girl and understood a lot, and the fact that she was his daughter was true. Ji Hoon couldn't believe it, and Bae-young told him to take a paternity test if he had any doubts about her words. Then Ji Hoon started asking why she disappeared, and without explaining anything, Bae-young just said that there were certain reasons. Ji Hoon didn't understand what those reasons were, and little Cherin was sitting behind him and seemed a bit upset. Bae-young said that she couldn't tell him about these reasons, but that she would have to leave her little daughter in his care because she would be gone for a while, and she promised to send money for Cherin. Besides, she had already arranged everything legally. Ji Hoon was furious, telling the woman not to hang up, but she replied that she had to go and would call back another time. The only thing that Ji Hoon angrily said was F-. And it was this F- that Cherin repeated with surprise. The confused man couldn't think of anything better than to say that he suddenly had a craving for pancakes. He would have been happy to swear a lot, but he couldn't say that in front of a child. The little girl happily replied that she also liked pancakes. Then Ji Hoon took Cherin's suitcase and invited her in, and the little girl happily ran after him. Her little hand touched his fingers, and Cherin said that she was finally at her dad's house for the first time. Ji Hoon was surprised when the girl said that. He looked at this smiling little Cherin with a big butterfly on her dress and was surprised that his daughter had appeared so suddenly. His life was not sweet enough as it was, and now he had a child. At the time, he had no idea how much his life would change from that moment on, and little Cherin continued to hold his hand. This is how Ji Hoon's life in Cherin began. The girl was surprised by the emptiness. There was not a single crumb in her father's drawers. He didn't know what to feed the child. He usually didn't eat at home. On weekends he slept until lunch and ordered food in the evening. Ji Hoon reached for his jacket and was about to go to the store when Cherin suddenly wanted to go with him. He started to put on his jacket and had to take it with him. Suddenly he thought that it was cold outside in January, and this little girl was wearing only one light dress. Then he asked where all her winter clothes were, and the girl happily replied that she never gets cold. The man was desperate. Maybe it was true, but he could not let her go in just one dress. Then he took Cherin in his arms. The girl was very surprised. Ji Hoon held the child close and wrapped her in his jacket. Cherin beamed at how warm she was, but Ji Hoon couldn't understand why she didn't dress warmly if she liked it. With a radiant and sweet face, the girl replied that she was not afraid of the cold. She liked the fact that Ji Hoon was warm. The man didn't mind walking around like this all the time, and even thought that he shouldn't buy her clothes that were too small. While Cherin was sitting in her father's arms, people around them started to pay attention to them. They thought it was very cute. But someone did see that the child was wearing only one dress, and Ji Hoon decided that he should buy her a down jacket. The man remembered that he had seen a children's clothing store in the mall, and he could buy the little girl's clothes there, because they attracted too much attention. And while Ji Hoon was running across the street, Cherin did not understand what was happening. Outside the children's store, they could hear the salesman thanking Ji Hoon for his purchase. The man did not understand why children's clothes were so expensive, because now he had almost nothing left in his account. But Cherin was happy. When they were going down the escalator, the girl asked her father what was wrong, because she could tell by the look on his face that he was sick. But Ji Hoon replied that she just imagined it. At the grocery store, a man was pushing a shopping cart and remembering the last time he cooked anything. He didn't even know if his rice cooker was working. There was no money for food, and the only thing left for Ji Hoon to do was to buy a breakfast cereal. In desperation, he asked his daughter if she liked that kind of food, and Cherin replied that she loved everything her father cooked. Ji Hoon was glad that she at least liked it. A moment later, the man was sweating. He did not understand what was happening to him. He was trying to remember what he had eaten yesterday, and the packet of breakfast cereal fell to the floor. Ji Hoon asked Cherin to stand still, because her dad urgently needed to go to the bathroom, and the girl agreed, saying that she would look around while she did. A moment later, the man ran through the store, almost knocking other customers down. As soon as Ji Hoon disappeared, Cherin's radiant face turned into something very sinister. The people around her admired the girl's beauty and couldn't understand why she was here alone. A gray-haired man approached Cherin to ask where her parents were. The girl replied with a comment that they had gone to the toilet. The man did not believe her words and offered to help her. Suddenly, the man's face became frightened. Cherin, as if shrouded in darkness, told him to back off. All the people around were stunned by what they had just seen. As people shouted in amazement, the girl continued to stand in the middle of the room. Her eyes shone and black lightning flashed behind her. Ji Hoon came back and apologized awkwardly to his daughter because he had to stand in line. Now the whole crowd of people were looking at the two of them. Cherin again ran up to her dad with a beaming smile and said that she had been good and asked if her dad's tummy was hurting. Then the girl put her hands on the man's stomach and began to say that Cherin had healing hands. Without removing her hands, she commanded her father's stomach to heal. Ji Hoon was surprised. He thought he was imagining things, but his pain really went away. The people around him started whispering, saying that the girl did not look like her father at all. They tried to speak quietly so that the man would not hear them. But he heard everything perfectly. They said that she most likely resembled her mother, that her mother was very beautiful in their minds, and that the child's father was just rich. Others objected and said that he looked like a beggar. Ji Hoon was furious. He didn't understand how they could gossip about a complete stranger, but there was no point in denying it. This smiling girl really didn't look like him. At the cash register, he wondered if Cherin was not his daughter at all. It was already dark outside. Ji Hoon sat at his computer and thought that the paternity test at the time lab cost a lot. But he had no other choice. He had to do everything in secret. He read on the website that the test required a hair sample. The man decided that he could just comb Cheirin's hair and get a few of her hairs. He looked very tired, so he decided to do it tomorrow. He also thought that he should warn the professor that he was late and that he would pick his brain again. Ji Hoon turned around and saw his daughter sleeping. Her hair seemed to shine under the moonlight. The tired man thought that even though Yona said that this was his child, she didn't even resemble him, and he could only assume that she was not his. Cherin continued to sleep under the moonlight. Ji Hoon thought that he would find out the truth tomorrow when he took the paternity test. The next morning, Ji Hoon was already in the hospital. He sat across from the doctor and was stunned. The doctor happily told him that the test had confirmed that Kim Jong-il was indeed his daughter. Ji Hoon did not understand how this was possible because she did not look like him at all. He seemed frozen when the doctor told him that there could be no mistake. Then he realized that Cherin was indeed his daughter. Ji Hoon walked down the street and did not understand what he should do now. Was he really supposed to raise a child now? Yona said she would send him child support, but he thought about the fact that he would have to go to work, and even if he sent Cherin to a kindergarten, he didn't know how to pick her up. The man was desperate, and his stress level was gradually increasing. As soon as Ji Hoon opened the door to the apartment, little Cherin ran into his arms. His expression brightened when he saw the little girl. She said she had been watching cartoons all day. Ji Hoon asked her not to sit close to the screen because her eyes would hurt and she would have to wear glasses. But the girl told him not to worry, because Cheirin's eyes were good. The man found himself thinking that it was more pleasant to come home when Cherin was there. He patted the child's head and told her that Daddy had to take a shower, so let her watch some more cartoons. Ji Hoon stood in front of the bathroom mirror and brushed his teeth. He was thinking that he would have to survive somehow. If things were going to work out this way, he would have to leave his PhD defense and start looking for a job. It had its advantages. He wouldn't have to see the disgusting professor. There was a noise outside the door. Cherin opened the door and said that she also wanted to brush her teeth. She held out her toothbrush to her daddy and asked for toothpaste. As she brushed her teeth, the toothpaste foamed and made bubbles. Ji Hoon thought it was quite cute. The two of them stood in front of the mirror, and Ji Hoon asked her if she had been bored all day. The little girl seemed upset, saying that she was bored and wanted to go to her daddy, but he was at work. Then she raised her head and smiled, saying that Cherin could be patient. Ji Hoon patted Cheirin's head and said that she was so grown up. Still, the man decided to ask where Cherin lived with her mother. The girl replied that it was very far away, and she wished her dad could go there too. Ji Hoon thought about it. If it's far away, it could be abroad, which is possible, since it's not the Joseon dynasty. The man poured some water into a cup and handed it to the little girl. He would have asked her many questions, but he could not burden the child with questions he would probably find out later. The moonlight flooded the room again. Cherin was sleeping with her daddy. She was very comfortable and happy. She asked excitedly if her daddy was happy that she had come. When she heard a yes, her hair, eyes and smile began to shine with joy. Cherin wanted to give her dad a massage, and Ji Hoon was even a little surprised. The girl began to rub her husband's back and said that Cherin was good at massaging. In fact, it should not be hidden that Ji Hoon was pleased. The man relaxed, because after a shower, the massage was incredible. Suddenly Cherin screamed. She saw that her daddy had fallen asleep. She poked his cheek with her finger. When he didn't react, she smiled and thought. A white glow began to appear from her little hands, and she told her daddy to be good. Her hair began to rise up, and the glow filled the whole room. She was telling him to be healthy. Meanwhile, Ji Hoon was sleeping, unaware. The light was intertwined in different patterns. She repeated the same words, and then she pointed the beam at his father. 2 ribbons of light rose from his back and began to intersect. Cherin was watching all this. Then everything suddenly disappeared, but the girl was happy. She lay down next to her dad, wished him good night and fell asleep. The alarm clock went off in the morning. Ji Hoon sat up on the bed and stretched. His expression became very surprised. His neck did not hurt. In the kitchen, he was getting some breakfast cereal for Cherin and thought about how his neck didn't hurt in any place. He was surprised because he hadn't done anything special yesterday. Joyful Cherin threw her arms around her father. She was already awake. Ji Hoon took his daughter in his arms and she asked him if he was feeling well this morning. The man was surprised that she would know. The girl hugged her father and said it was all thanks to the massage. The man patted Cherin on the head and said that she was a good girl and that she was his only joy. The girl was happy and promised to do massages every day. Then Ji Hoon sat his joyful daughter down at the table and offered her something to eat. The phone rang. Ji Hoon was surprised, because who would call so early? His mother's number was displayed on the phone screen. He looked at it silently and smiled. He had completely forgotten that he needed to tell his parents about his granddaughter. Angry, Ji Hoon did not know what to do, whether to lie or tell the truth. The phone kept ringing. Ji Hoon was desperate because he didn't know what to do. He decided that he needed to calm down and act as if everything was normal. Ji Hoon reached for the phone. He picked up the phone and tried to be calm, but his mom realized that something was wrong with his voice. Cherin looked at her father in surprise and ate her breakfast. Mom asked if he had eaten breakfast today, and the man almost blurted out that they had eaten breakfast together. Ji Hoon, worried, told his mother not to worry, because he was eating well. His mother stopped asking and told her son that she was going to call him yesterday. She was looking for a job for him. Ji Hoon was very surprised by this. In a calm tone, he replied that he had already made up his mind and would not be getting his PhD this year. He needed a job. While her husband was talking to her mom about coming to visit her on New Year's Eve, Cherin looked at her dad with somewhat confused eyes. He told Mom that he would come next week, and of course, Mom was very happy about it. Ji Hoon hung up the phone and breathed a sigh of relief. He was going to introduce Cherin to his parents next week. His mom was happy, unlike her son. He didn't know how they would react to the bad news. Cherin ran up to Ji Hoon and hugged him. The man was surprised. He pretended that everything was fine, but Cherin could see that he was sad, so she became sad too. The girl looked at her father with a serious face and asked him to tell her when something was bothering her dad, and then she would make sure that he was okay. Ji Hoon replied that he would definitely tell her and then took her to the table. The man asked if the girl liked cereal. She happily replied that they were delicious because she was eating them with her daddy. Cherin was smiling. Ji Hoon realized that his little daughter was really dispelling all his worries. He thought that it would be great if time could stop right now and all his worries would just disappear. It was a sunny day outside. In the school corridor, Chang Su's surprised voice was heard. He saw happy Ji Hoon and wondered where the dark circles around his eyes had gone. Ji Hoon hadn't noticed the absence of neck pain in the morning, but when he saw the dark circles in the mirror, he was surprised because they had been with him since he started working in the lab. The man wondered how Cherin's massage could have helped him. He could not find any scientific explanation. Then Chang Su said that Ji Hoon was looking for a professor. He didn't know what he wanted from the man. But he said that the professor was not in a good mood, so Ji Hoon had better be careful, and Ji Hoon thanked him with a happy face. Ji Hoon knocked on the door and entered the office. Before he could say a few words, a pile of paper flew into his face. The professor was very angry. While Ji Hoon was picking up the papers from the floor, the professor was scolding him for his bad annotation. When Ji Hoon looked up at the professor, he was very surprised. Ji Hoon looked like a fresh cucumber, and the professor began to scold him for it, because in his opinion, Ji Hoon was sleeping well and was not ashamed of the play he had written. The man got up from his knees, and the professor began to say that Ji Hoon was an untalented employee and that he was ashamed of him. Then he started shouting and said that Ji Hoon was almost 30 and had no intelligence. Ji Hoon started to get angry when the professor started to say that only because of him would all doors open for Ji Hoon. The man was angry because he thought the professor was an old cad, because yesterday he had praised his abstract. Whenever the professor was in a bad mood, he would take it out on Ji Hoon, and when the argument ended, he would blackmail him with his privileges. When the professor had yelled enough, he breathed a sigh of relief and asked him not to make such gross mistakes next time. He put his hand on Ji Hoon's shoulder and asked him about his PhD. Ji Hoon replied that he hadn't thought about it. The professor said that a high-class engineer can only be a PhD, and then he pushed Ji Hoon out the door. In the corridor, Chang Su ran up to Ji Hoon to ask if he was okay. He told him not to pay attention to the professor because he was yelling at everyone. Ji Hoon waved him off and said with a smile that he was fine. In fact, he was very upset. Ji Hoon looked at the screen of his phone, thinking about sending the professor 3 funny letters and leaving with a scandal. Suddenly he was surprised. On his phone, he saw a smiling photo of Cherin taking a selfie. Ji Hoon's mood began to improve. He was very touched. He realized that even looking at her photo made his heart melt and his soul calm. Ji Hoon leaned back and exhaled. He decided to hold out for another 6 months and then quit. The man began to type something and thought that he would try not to do anything that could be found fault with. Ji Hoon cheered up, and a melody started playing in his head. He sat in front of the computer and thought he could hold out. After a while, the work was completed. Ji Hoon corrected all the mistakes and hurried home to Cherin. Suddenly, he turned to Cherin, his colleague, and asked if she had seen the professor. She very rudely said no. In surprise, she turned to Ji Hoon and asked why he was asking her that. Ji Hoon was confused and apologized. He had noticed that she had been depressed and irritated lately, but he didn't understand why. Cherin opened the door and went out into the hallway. Suddenly, she stiffened because she heard the professor's voice addressing her as my Cherin. He stepped out of the shadows and asked her where she was going in such a hurry. With a broad smile, he reminded her to look in his office before leaving. The girl just looked at him and did not say a word. Ji Hoon returned home and called Cherin. She threw her arms around her father and told him that she missed him very much. The man also missed her. She looked at her dad happily and said that she had cooked her own rice and eaten it. Ji Hoon praised Cherin, and she beamed with joy. The man looked at the plate and felt a little sad. He was very worried that Cherin would lose weight from all the food and then Jonah would kill him. Cherin did not understand his surprise. Ji Hoon picked up the phone and decided to call his mom, because it was no big deal and he and his daughter had to go to their parents' house tomorrow. He couldn't explain anything to his mother, but there was no other way out. He couldn't leave Cherin alone from morning to evening. The next morning, the professor scolded Ji Hoon again because he was going to be late due to family circumstances. He even shouted at him on the phone to give up his PhD because Ji Hoon was not going to work. The man promised to fix the family affairs and come to work. Cherin looked at her father with surprised eyes. The man had been desperate after talking to the professor, but his expression changed immediately when Cherin asked him who had called him and why he was yelling. The man explained that it was the professor who teaches him and that his dad was just a little bit guilty. The girl was surprised. Ji Hoon asked her not to worry, because it was his fault. Cherin was upset, and Ji Hoon didn't know how to explain everything to his parents, and he hoped they wouldn't kick him out and help him. Cherin was angry because of the professor. Ji Hoon and his daughter came to his parents' house. When they opened the door, a happy Cherin stood on the threshold and told them that she was their granddaughter. The man and woman, Ji Hoon's parents, were at a loss for words. Ji Hoon was confused, saying that it was his daughter. Ji Hoon's mother was dizzy and his father could not believe it. Ji Hoon explained that he had only found out a few days ago when Yona called him. The parents remembered Yona, a girl their son used to date. Ji Hoon said that they had gone on a tour once, and that was probably where it happened. The father asked if the woman had been raising the child alone all this time, and Ji Hoon replied that she had said so. The angry father took a swing at his son, not understanding how Ji Hoon could believe that and why he had come alone and not with Yona. Ji Hoon replied that she couldn't make it and that they hadn't spoken to each other since the phone call. Then he pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket. Ji Hoon showed his father a paternity test that proved that Cherin was indeed his daughter. The parents were shocked. Ji Hoon's father asked his wife to feed the child while he talked to his son. He went to the door and called Ji Hoon to come with him. His mother took Cherin with her to eat, which the girl gladly agreed to. The father wiped his eyes and asked what his son was going to do now. Ji Hoon replied that he would raise the girl because she was his child. But that wasn't what the father was interested in. He asked about Yona, but Ji Hoon couldn't get in touch with her. Then his father asked if it was because of Cherin that he had come to visit them so quickly for the weekend. Ji Hoon scratched the back of his head and answered embarrassedly that he couldn't keep an eye on her because of his work. And he couldn't feed her properly either, and he didn't want it to continue. The room fell silent. Ji Hoon would not have been surprised if his parents had kicked him out in a scandal because he had brought home a child who had fallen over. He didn't know what he was thinking because he didn't even have a job. He told his father that it was normal to worry about the child. The father promised his son that he would look after his granddaughter, but Ji Hoon would have to find Yona and get back together with her. Ji Hoon was very surprised. The father said that parents should raise a child together, and even if he found a job, he should live with Yona. Ji Hoon was happy. He realized that his father had accepted Cherin as his granddaughter. The father replied that he was doing his best for Cherin, not for his son. Ji Hoon was happy and thanked his father, but he reminded his son that his life would not be honey and he felt bad about having to spend the money they had saved for his son's wedding. Ji Hoon apologized, but his father said that he could just pay him back later if he decided to get married. Ji Hoon was beaming with happiness, and he was very grateful to his father. The man was glad that he had accepted Cherin. It was a sunny day outside. Ji Hoon was getting ready to leave and promised Cherin to come back in the evening. He patted his daughter's head and asked her to obey her grandparents, and then one day they would go out together. The girl was surprised. She held out her little finger to her daddy to fulfill this promise. Ji Hoon held out his little finger in return. The girl waved goodbye to her dad. Ji Hoon's parents were no longer angry. They waved back and said goodbye until the evening. Ji Hoon went outside. Today he felt as if he was flying on wings to work, and it was the first time he had ever done so. He ran happily down the street and hummed something. He had been afraid that Cherin would go hungry, but now his worries were gone. Today was his first weekend with Cherin, and he wanted to go for a walk with the girl. Ji Hoon was relieved. He took out his phone and started to choose where they would go together. He wanted to go to Everland because there were many beautiful views. Cherin was now part of their family. As he walked, he thought about how before she came into his life, he used to spend his weekends sleeping and doing nothing. Ji Hoon looked up at the sky and thought that this was the first time he was looking forward to a day off. But, that evening, he heard a surprised voice from the office window asking about outdoor team building. The professor did not understand the surprise. The project was almost complete and he decided to hold a team building event in nature before the new year this weekend. He turned to Ji Hoon with a smile and asked him if he had any family emergencies because he had already taken off work twice for this and could have taken care of all the business during this time. Ji Hoon embarrassedly replied that he did have plans for the weekend. The professor looked at Ji Hoon in surprise. He did not understand what kind of plans he could have. Ji Hoon did not know what to say. He decided to go anyway and angrily told the professor that he had solved all the family circumstances. The professor was happy, put his hand on Ji Hoon's shoulder and said that they would go to nature on the weekend and recuperate. He then turned to Yerim and Changsu and asked if they would go as well, but no one answered him. The professor turned around and said with a smile on his face that silence is a sign of consent and asked them to remember that if someone refused, he would be very upset. The room was completely silent. Everyone was outraged because they had their own plans for the weekend. Changsu called the professor a stuffy old man because he thought everyone stayed home on weekends, just like him. Ji Hoon was worried. Everyone in the lab was under pressure from the professor and no one could openly speak up. Ji Hoon realized that he would have to postpone the trip to the amusement park to the next weekend. Their careers were a carrot on the professor's fishing rod, and everyone was blindly following them like donkeys. No one likes it, but they have to do what the professor says. Ji Hoon looked at the monitor. He felt bad, because he couldn't give up this nonsense. He thought Cherin would be very upset. After work, Ji Hoon and Cherin went for a walk. He was embarrassed to tell the girl that he was sorry, but that her daddy would not be able to be with her this weekend. The girl, wrapped in a warm scarf, just stared at Ji Hoon in silence as he told her that they would definitely go next weekend and that he had already bought the tickets. The girl hugged her surprised father. He asked her if she was upset. The girl replied that Cherin would be able to get over it. She saw that her father did not want to go on this trip and that someone was forcing him. She said that it would even be good for her father because he hadn't done any sports for a long time. Ji Hoon looked at his daughter and told her not to worry, because everything would be fine. Cherin looked at Ji Hoon and asked if he was being honest. The man hugged the girl and said that he was. Cherin asked if it was because of the evil uncle who called him today that Daddy had to go camping. Ji Hoon was surprised and replied that it was their professor. They had finished a project and he wanted to celebrate it together in nature. Cherin hugged her surprised father and asked him to be careful and come back safe and sound. Ji Hoon told the girl not to worry, because the mountain they were going to climb was safe and not difficult. He hugged the girl, and Cheirin's eyes shone with fury. In the evening, they returned home. Ji Hoon took a shower and asked Cherin if she was sleeping. The girl did not answer. He thought she was probably asleep. It was not surprising, because they had been traveling home for an hour by bus, and of course she was tired. It was a shame that they wouldn't be able to talk, but there was nothing that could be done. Ji Hoon lay down on the bed. It was already 1 o'clock in the morning, and the only thing he had time to do was wash himself and go to bed. He thought that if he had to travel like this every day, public transportation would make him a poor man. He was just starting to think about going to kindergarten, but decided to think about it in the morning. Cherin opened her eyes. She realized that her daddy had fallen asleep. Again her hands glowed. She called out to her daddy for a deep and sound sleep. Ji Hoon continued to sleep unsuspectingly and smiled. The girl was happy to see this smile. Suddenly her expression became very angry. She decided to scold this evil uncle, the professor. She stretched out her hand to her sleeping father and apologized, because she needed to peek at his memory a little. Pictures flashed in front of the girl with the image of this professor who was in Ji Hoon's thoughts. His name was Jang Dong-ho, an old boomer who played the good guy in public but was actually cunning and sneaky. He sucked up to those above him and was a tyrant to his subordinates. Cherin remembered her mother's words. She told her to remember that if Cherin saw a hypocrite oppressing people, she could punish him. But you need to intervene in this situation in a way that does not disrupt natural processes. You need to do everything so that sin swallows a person like a swamp. The girl's dress began to rise. She flew upward, enveloped in radiance. Cherin said the professor's name and asked him to show her where he was. The radiance enveloped the girl even more, and she found him. Cherin turned to her father and said that she would be back soon. She needed to teach the rascal an important lesson. The girl disappeared, leaving behind shining stripes. The room was lit up. Cherin descended from this radiance. She stood in front of the bed with Jang Do-ho sleeping. She decided to see what he was hiding. Shining purple balls flew out of her hand. They flew to the professor and scattered over him in different patterns. They were sins, many of them, and they were brewing. Cherin wondered which one she should choose so that it would bear fruit. Then she reached for one of the balls that would bring the most harm. Of course, she would have to save another person, but it was all for her daddy's sake. She ordered the balloon to return to Jang Dong-ho and the other person who was involved with her. Now this sin will ripen before its time and bear fatal fruit. It would be painful, but it would be worse if this sin were to mature far into the future without Cheirin's help. She felt radiant again and decided to come back later to check the result. Her mother had told her that you have to keep an eye on things when you start such processes. Ji Hoon's room glowed again. A happy Cherin lay on the bed next to her dad. She imagined how surprised he would be when he found out. He would probably only find out later what she had done. Cherin was beaming with happiness. When her daddy found out, she would tell him that it was a special surprise for him. She wrapped herself in a blanket and said good night to her daddy. It was already quite sunny outside when Ji Hoon brought Cherin to his parents. She kissed her daddy on the cheek and asked him to be careful. Ji Hoon put the girl down on the ground and asked her to obey her grandparents, who were happily waiting for Cherin at the door. Ji Hoon promised his daughter that they would play together tomorrow. Cherin asked her grandmother if it was true that she was obedient. The grandmother put her arms around the girl's shoulders and told her that Cherin was their little beauty, a golden girl, and that her son should not worry. Ji Hoon was touched. He thought that when his child is complimented, it feels much stronger than compliments given to him. He was pleased that Cherin was being praised. His parents told Ji Hoon that it was dangerous in the mountains in winter and asked him to be careful. He promised to be careful and said goodbye. Ji Hoon was in despair. This was not the weekend he had hoped for. This is the life of a graduate, depending on the whims of a professor. The weather was sunny in the mountains. The happy professors thanked everyone for coming together this weekend. He asked everyone to enjoy the cool, fresh air so that everyone could see what a friendly working team they have. After that, he called everyone to follow him. Chang-soo was unhappy, saying behind the professor's back that if he liked the mountains so much, he should go there himself instead of dragging everyone along. Ji Hoon asked Chang-soo to speak quietly because Jang Do-ho could hear everything. There were a lot of people around. Chang-soo couldn't believe it was so crowded, so they wouldn't even get the promised fresh air. Ji Hoon had heard that tourism was booming, and as it turned out, it was true. Chang-soo complained that the mountain was too high, that it was too much and he would die on the way. Ji Hoon was surprised that Chang-soo seemed to be tired, but he did not stop talking. So Chang-soo turned to Ji Hoon and asked him if he was tired. Surprisingly, Ji Hoon seemed fine. He had already begun to suspect that Ji Hoon was playing sports without him, but their schedules were the same, so there was no time for sports. As they walked up the stairs, Chang-soo thought it was suspicious. Maybe his partner was eating some healthy food without him, because his skin had recently brightened up a lot. But Ji Hoon hesitantly replied that he hadn't done anything like that. It was worth noting that the man had indeed been feeling lighter lately. Before that, it was common for him to have pain all over his body after sleep. Ji Hoon remembered the smiling Cherin. Ever since she had come, he had been feeling better and better. And even during the professor's screams, the thought of Cherin made him feel better. Chang-soo was very tired, unlike the energetic Ji Hoon, who was thinking about seeing his daughter as soon as possible. Chang-soo was upset because he and Ji Hoon had always been inseparable, and now he was smiling at his thoughts. The man began to calm his friend down and say that without him, he really didn't do anything. However, he noticed that his friend was out of shape and that he hadn't been like that last year. Chang-soo replied that last year his stomach was just starting to grow. He sat down on the bench and began to breathe heavily. Ji Hoon was a little worried about his friend because he was only in his third decade and already so unhealthy. Chang-soo replied that Ji Hoon was a cheater because a lab rat can't have such stamina. Suddenly, they heard the professor's voice. He was speaking to Yerim, saying that if she was tired, she could rest as long as she needed. The girl was silent. Her friend started talking about her. Chang-soo said that Yerim Nuna had been very gloomy and depressed lately. Ji Hoon then asked what his friend knew about it. But he didn't know anything. She had been like this since last year's New Year's Eve corporate party. Chang-soo thought she had some kind of problem with the professor. Ji Hoon was interested in this idea. His friend said that Yerim Nuna had been absent for a long time after the corporate party and that it had all started since then. Ji Hoon thought about it and realized that it was true. Chang-soo was surprised that she hadn't had anything to do with the absences. If it had been him or Ji Hoon, the professor would have torn them to pieces. He began to suspect that the professor had forgiven her because he was involved in her disappearance. That's why he was so angry when he asked where she was. Ji Hoon laughed and asked his friend to speak quietly so that the professor wouldn't hear. Then Chang-soo joked and said that in that case, he would tell the professor that it was Ji Hoon who started the conversation. Ji Hoon jokingly started chasing Chang-soo, saying that he was crazy. The sun continued to shine in the sky and the company stopped at a cafe. They happily raised a glass to the success of their laboratory. Everyone was sitting at a set table when the professor said that it was always good to drink after a hike. Only Yerim was not in a good mood. Then the professor sat down next to her, asked her to smile, and offered to drink with her. Yerim agreed, but she was thinking that the professor disgusted her and made her sick. The girl picked up a glass. Before drinking, she asked the professor with a serious face if he had forgotten his promise. The professor was surprised and asked what promise she was talking about. Yerim instantly blushed and her expression became very angry. The professor began to say awkwardly that he remembered everything and that she shouldn't be angry. He took her by the elbow and said that he would secure her an exchange place abroad, and when she returned, he would help her get a professorship. He looked at her seductively and said that she knew who he was. He is Jang Dong-ho. The professor was surprised by this reaction. She slammed her fist on the table and said that he had to do what he promised. Otherwise, she would do it herself. The professor was outraged and accused Yerim of threatening him. The girl said that she did not threaten him. She thought that he had threatened her, that he would cut off all her career paths. She thought he was a scumbag, but she couldn't say that. She thought she had done the right thing. Yerim felt as if she was surrounded by a sinful purple glow. She didn't understand why it was so hard for her to control her emotions today. Then the professor said he would be honest. He would keep his promise, but she had to be honest too. Yerim agreed. The professor was very surprised. She smiled and promised to be honest. Yerim was shining purple. They sat on the couch together and smiled while the purple light absorbed everything around them. Little Cherin stood on the balcony and held a purple ball in front of her, which was also shrouded in radiance. She realized that Yerim was having a hard time. Her hair was developing. Cherin understood that the girl was in pain, but she knew that soon everything would be over and everything would be fine. Ji Hoon was very surprised by the news. Professor Chan was summoned to the prosecutor's office. Chang-soo said that it turned out that after the weekend team building, Jang Dong-ho had been harassing Yerim. Ji Hoon couldn't even think of such a thing. He thought that the professor had at least a little bit of common sense left, but he had lost touch with reality. Now it was clear why Yerim was so irritated. Chang-Soo was worried about this, because without the professor, he would have to make a report on the closure of the project. And then Ji Hoon remembered the project. The university probably already considered it closed. Hatch Group had commissioned a research paper from the professor, but now it was all for nothing. Chang-Soo lamented that he had spent many sleepless nights on this project. He did not know what would happen to their work now. The professor hadn't put any effort into this project, but it was ordered in his name. Without Professor Chan, all their work would be for nothing. Ji Hoon looked around. All the lab technicians were in despair. Suddenly, one of the lab technicians came up to him and said that the dean was calling him. Ji Hoon was surprised and asked what the dean wanted from him. But he did not say anything to the lab assistant. Ji Hoon did not understand what the dean wanted from him. Ji Hoon went to the dean's office. A gray-haired man with glasses asked if Ji Hoon knew why the professor was absent. Ji Hoon replied that he did, in general terms. The dean continued to say that he knew the project was almost complete. The worried man replied that all they had to do was check and write a report, but the professor. The dean angrily put his mug on the table and said that he was now instructing Ji Hoon to complete the project. The guy was shocked. He was at a loss for words. The dean calmly said that Ji Hoon was the senior staff member in the lab, and if what happened to the professor was what happened, then he should take responsibility for the project and complete it. Ji Hoon was stunned. This is an order for laboratory research for industrial use, and the dean should know how it works. They are in terrible competition with other laboratories. Before Ji Hoon could say a few words, the dean told him that he had already contacted the Hatch Group, so the only thing left for him to do was to finish and deliver the project. The dean smiled and told Ji Hoon not to worry and to work calmly, because he always does a great job. Ji Hoon was as if inspired. He returned to his workplace. He briefly recounted everything that had happened in the dean's office, and the only thing left for him to do was to read and hand in the project. All the lab technicians were surprised by this news. Chang-Soo said that he knew what the problem was. The rector's election is coming up, and the dean clearly wants to take credit for this project and thus increase his chances of getting the job. Everyone agreed with this, because it was logical. Of course, he would like to get promoted. Ji Hoon was happy, because his task was just to prepare and make a detailed report. Chang-Soo began to joke that if Ji Hoon stumbled and mumbled, the dean would fail his entire report. He added that Ji Hoon should remember to take his medication before his speech. There was a smack. Chang-Soo called Ji Hoon a thief, because he would fight for a harmless joke. Ji Hoon, laughing, went with the other lab technicians to finish the project. They had failed in the morning, but they still had time. The report was due tomorrow, so they could still make it if they tried. Ji Hoon was happy and encouraged his colleagues to get to work. In the evening, Ji Hoon picked up Cherin from her parents. The pedestrian light was red. The man asked his daughter how her day had been and if she had obeyed her grandparents. Cherin answered that she had and that she had eaten a lot of goodies. They walked happily down the street hand in hand. Ji Hoon apologized for being late. Cherin understood that her dad was at work, so she didn't get upset. The man said that tomorrow he would go to the office of the big hatch company, so he had to stay late today. The girl asked him what he was going to do there. Ji Hoon happily told her that he was going to give a presentation there and asked Cherin to keep her fingers crossed that he would succeed. Cheirin's smile shone, and she promised to cheer for him. It was already dark outside. Ji Hoon was sleeping, and Cherin was sitting on the bed next to him, wondering what she should do. A jar with the words confidence and charm and knowledge floated into her hands. They all hovered in a glow over the joyful girl. She could not choose which one would help her daddy the most. She grabbed the jar. She added a little bit of knowledge. And a little self-confidence. She thought about it. She also added a little bit of charm. She wanted a little bit, but accidentally got too much. But Cherin hoped that everything would be fine. All these mixtures merged into one radiance. And yet, Cherin decided that there is never too much magic. She lifted the radiance up and rejoiced. It began to approach Ji Hoon and made its way into his body like a thin ribbon. Cherin rubbed her hand on her forehead and wished her dad good luck. In the morning, Ji Hoon thought about it. He hadn't worn such clothes for a long time, so he asked his daughter if it suited him. A happy Cherin gave him a thumbs up and said that it looked great on him. Ji Hoon put on a black jacket and tie and thought about how he felt calm and confident in the morning. He wore an elegant black suit and a white shirt. Ji Hoon said goodbye to Cherin. He felt like he could move mountains that day. The sunlight reflected off the panoramic windows. Ji Hoon stood in front of the office. Suddenly he began to worry, because this was the first time he had come here alone and maybe he should have listened to Chang-Soo and taken the medicine. He went to the entrance and began to calm himself down. His task was just to explain the results of the study in a clear way. Besides, he already knew the director, Yang, and everything would be fine. He remembered his daughter telling him that he was the best. He realized that Cherin was rooting for him, so he had to try his best and not lose his confidence. Ji Hoon stood in the hallway. The secretary told him that the management would be here soon. She also said that the director of the corporation would also be at the presentation, so Ji Hoon had time to prepare. The man was surprised. He said he was ready and asked to print the materials from the USB. The girl was shocked by his confidence. In his mind, Ji Hoon was crying. He was very confident in the morning, but when he heard that the director of the corporation would be there, his confidence was shaken. He realized that if the CEO was there, so was the top manager. His one mistake cost him his career. While Ji Hoon was almost crying from worry, a man approached him. It was Yang's boss, and Ji Hoon greeted him. Yang said that this was not the best moment, of course. Ji Hoon's tears started to flow, and he asked why it wasn't the best time. The worried man said he would explain everything after the presentation. Ji Hoon stood behind the podium as if dead while everyone took their seats. His confidence was shattered, and he hadn't even started. He had forgotten what he was going to do. The secretary invited people into the office. A man in gray pants sat down in a chair. His face was displeased, and he told Ji Hoon to start. The guy was sweating. He had seen this man on TV, and even then he thought he had a hard look in his eyes. It seemed to Ji Hoon that if he faltered even once, he would simply be kicked out. He resigned himself, grabbed the podium with his hands, and began his presentation. All eyes were on him. After a while, Ji Hoon finished his report. Everyone was silent. The man did not know where to go. Excitedly, he tried to remember where he might have made a mistake. He didn't even remember what he was talking about. Whatever happened, Ji Hoon hoped it wouldn't happen soon. The man in the gray pants asked for his name. Ji Hoon thought the man was asking about the name of the study, so he started to say the name of the study, but the man replied that he was not blind and could see the name on the screen. He was interested in the name of the speaker. Ji Hoon didn't understand why he wanted his name, but he introduced himself. Then the man turned to Ji Hoon and asked him to describe the degree of accuracy of the experiment. The young man replied that their research method was 95% accurate. Then he asked what gives such an accuracy rate. The man smiled, and Ji Hoon explained. He saw that smile. He considered it a success, because this serious man smiled. The man said that was all he wanted to know. Everyone started to say goodbye to him. Ji Hoon realized that he was finished. He thought that smiling was something good, but it seems the opposite is true. He was disappointed because this serious man just got up and left. He was addressed, but Ji Hoon did not hear the first time because of his own thoughts. Yang said that they were listening carefully and that the director seemed to like his presentation. Ji Hoon was disappointed. He didn't really believe it, because the director just got up and left. However, the audience began to say that the mood seemed to be positive. Ji Hoon couldn't figure out if this was good or bad. He was confused. Those present at the presentation began to discuss the report. One of the men began to say that they should urgently implement the technology that this research had provided and that this way they would outperform the competition. One of the women was worried that the investment might not pay off, so they couldn't throw money away. They began to argue. A nervous Ji Hoon realized that they were discussing internal company matters, and so he thought he should leave. Then the man involved in the argument banged his hand on the table and suggested asking for an expert's opinion. He pointed to Ji Hoon and asked what he thought about it. The guy was confused. Suddenly, the man scratched the back of his head and apologized because he remembered that Ji Hoon was not their employee. And he wasn't the only one who thought that. The man began to say that Ji Hoon's tense face reminded him of when he was a new employee and making a presentation in front of his boss for the first time. Ji Hoon smiled, thinking that it was really easy to mistake him for a kitten, a dog, or even a hutch employee. Perhaps he should have been happy that they liked him so much. One of the women turned to Yang's supervisor and smilingly asked him to escort Ji Hoon out, since they had detained him. The man agreed. Ji Hoon and Supervisor Yang left the office. The guy was walking on his ass and thought he was finally going to get out of here. Supervisor Yang laughed and said that Ji Hoon's knees were almost shaking, but he did a great job despite the presence of the director. They stood in the hallway. Yang said that he used to think Ji Hoon was shy, but today he changed his mind. The guy was surprised and thanked him. Suddenly, the boss said that they had already decided to merge the project. Ji Hoon was dumbfounded, very surprised by these words. He almost started to cry, because all the words that were said to him were just to comfort him, and he decided that everyone lives in a very unfair society. But Supervisor Yang began to calm him down, because everything had gone perfectly. Ji Hoon looked at him with tearful, surprised eyes. The bright sun was shining through the windows. Ji Hoon asked what to do about the project's leak. Yang replied that it was a matter of schools. That's why the boss was so angry and came to hear the presentation in person. He put his hands on the upset boy's shoulders. Yang couldn't talk about it, because sometimes it happens that the less you know, the better you sleep. He asked Ji Hoon to move away from the topic of business and asked him with a serious face if he was going to improve his skills abroad. Ji Hoon was surprised and replied that he hadn't planned to. Suddenly, Mr. Yang's face lit up and asked him what Ji Hoon thought about working for their company. The guy seemed happy, but was surprised and thought it was a recruitment. Yang smiled and asked him not to be scared, but to listen, because Ji Hoon probably knows that there is a lot of competition for the professionals they hire. Ji Hoon knew that. Yang continued to say with a smile that for some reason the boss liked Ji Hoon, so if he thought about a career, the doors of their company would be open to him. Ji Hoon smiled back and thanked him for his attention to his person. They were already at the entrance to the building, and Yang said that he should thank his boss, and that his presentation had impressed everyone. Then he thanked the guy and they said goodbye. Despite the bright sun, there were no more leaves on the trees. It was an incredible day. From the beginning, it seemed like everything was going to fail. Ji Hoon still couldn't believe that the director liked his performance. He thought it was some kind of magic. However, later, after a chain of luck, Ji Hoon smiled and thought, what kind of magic can there be these days? It's just that sometimes you get lucky. Suddenly, Ji Hoon's phone rang. He took it out and didn't realize what had happened. Suddenly he was confused and didn't know what to do. On screen 0 of the phone, a message appeared saying that Yona had sent him money. Ji Hoon remembered that it was the promised alimony. Then his surprise faded and he smiled. Ji Hoon wanted to get takeout chicken for dinner tonight, but now he could go to a restaurant. He walked down the street humming. He had even finished his workday early, so Ji Hoon tried not to waste any time. It was already evening when they arrived at the restaurant. His parents were a little upset. The father said that they were glad that their son came home from work early and took them to the restaurant, but he asked if everything was okay at work. The mother was worried that everything was expensive and that this evening would hurt her son's budget. Ji Hoon sat next to a happy Cherin. He said that he had left early because they had finished the project and he had money. There were various salads, steaks, pasta with shrimp on the table. The parents were surprised to see how Ji Hoon had come by the money. The boy explained that Cherin's mother had sent it to buy her food. Ji Hoon's father smiled and praised Cherin for cutting the steak very properly, according to etiquette, and asked who taught her how to do it. The girl smiled and said it was her mom. Ji Hoon's mother beamed with joy and said that Cherin was a precious little girl, very well-mannered, with good manners, and that Yona was a good mother. She wondered how Ji Hoon could have such a wonderful daughter, since he used to break all the dishes when he was a child. Cherin drank lemonade through a straw. Ji Hoon replied, embarrassed, that Cherin probably looked more like her mother. He looked at the smiling Cherin and thought that he was even a little sad that she didn't look like him, but that was nothing, and the main thing was that she was his daughter. The man exhaled and thanked his parents for taking care of Cherin all this time, and maybe they wouldn't have to do it anymore. The parents were surprised. They thought something had happened. The evening sun was shining on the restaurant's sign. Ji Hoon explained to his parents that Professor Chan was in trouble with the law, and now it was even worse, so he would not be coming back. There was no point in staying in the lab without the professor. My mom was surprised. She thought the professor needed some help. Her son began to reassure her he wasn't going to get a PhD anyway. He would just finish his master's degree and go into the field of engineering research. The parents were upset, but they believed that their son would succeed. Ji Hoon smiled and asked them not to worry about him. He had to be responsible, because now he had Cherin. It was already dark outside when the father and daughter returned home. Ji Hoon asked how she was doing at her grandparents' house. Cherin answered that it was good. Her grandmother cooked her something delicious every day. Ji Hoon looked at his daughter suspiciously and asked her if she liked him or her grandparents better. The girl smiled and said that she loved him the most. The man was very happy to hear this. He picked up his daughter and told her that her daddy also loved her more than anyone else in the world. Suddenly the girl reached for his face. Ji Hoon was surprised. She asked if he was comfortable wearing glasses all the time. The man smiled and said that of course he was uncomfortable. Then the girl asked why he wore them. The moonlight illuminated everything around them. Ji Hoon said that he could not read and look through the microscope without them. Cherin was surprised. Ji Hoon carried her in his arms and told her that he was very proud of her kind heart because she always took care of him. The little girl did not mind because he was her daddy. The usual cold winter was the same as before, but Ji Hoon felt so warm because he had Cherin by his side. The blue sky stretched over the courthouse. The criminal case against Professor Chan was fast-tracked because Yerim had spent a long time collecting evidence and presenting it. There was a huge crowd outside the building. Students were outraged when they learned about the incident. They were holding signs with inscriptions like Professor Chan, get out of education or rapist to jail. All the courses he taught were canceled. Chan Dongho was fired. Thanks to these events, Ji Hoon and Cherin had a relaxing week. The happy girl sat on the bed next to her father and asked if they would go to the amusement park tomorrow. Ji Hoon answered that they would. The weather was supposed to be nice tomorrow, so he suggested that Cherin have fun. They heard a noise outside the window. The father and daughter went to the window. Thin strips of water were running down the glass. Ji Hoon was surprised to see rain in the middle of winter. Cherin asked what they would do if it didn't stop raining by tomorrow. Ji Hoon almost shouted with anger. The weather forecast showed rain until at least Saturday. The man did not understand when it had been changed. In this weather, he couldn't even leave the house. Cherin folded her hands in front of her and told her worried father to pray as soon as possible. The girl closed her eyes and said that if she prayed, rain would go away. Ji Hoon was surprised. He thought that praying to the rain was very cute. He almost cried because he thought that if the prayers worked, he would have prayed himself to win the lottery 100 times. Cherin looked at him and was indignant because he had to pray. She folded his hands and told him to repeat after her. She diligently began to ask Rain not to come tomorrow. Ji Hoon thought it was strange, but he agreed. The two of them stood in front of the window with the rain pattering on it and repeated the same words. The man did not believe it would work. He didn't want Cherin to be upset in the morning. In the morning, Cherin began to wake up her father. Ji Hoon wiped his sleepy eyes, and his daughter asked him to go see something with her as soon as possible. The man was surprised, because the alarm clock hadn't rung yet. Cherin began to rush her father to go with her as soon as possible. Ji Hoon sat on the bed and did not understand what she wanted to show him. Outside the window, a bunch of small white snowflakes were flying. Cherin turned to her father and asked how he was feeling, because snow is better than rain. Ji Hoon couldn't believe his eyes, it really wasn't raining. They both looked at the falling snow. The girl said that all they had to do was pray. The man thought that his prayers had never been answered before, and this was a miracle. He looked at Cherin and didn't know what was better, the rain or the cold snow, but lately, one good thing after another. Cherin looked at the snow as if mesmerized. The man suggested that his daughter go wash and get ready and said that there would be traffic jams because of the snow. Cherin happily agreed. The happy girl said she had to hurry. Ji Hoon thought that today would be the best day he would ever have with Cherin. A huge Ferris wheel was sprinkling snow. Cherin was very happy, she thought it was a fairy tale world. Ji Hoon was worried that the girl would like it. She was happy to be in such a big, beautiful place. The man was thinking about where to go first, maybe to see some animals, but Cherin had already seen something. Ji Hoon noticed her interest and it was clear that they would go there. But just in case, the man asked if Cherin wanted to go there. The enchanted girl said yes. Ji Hoon couldn't stop looking, he felt like his heart was starting to pound. Cherin was wearing a deer cap with little bells on the ties. The girl said that this hat was very warm. Ji Hoon sat down in front of Cherin and said that it looked great on her. The happy girl asked her dad to pick something for her as well. The man was a little embarrassed and explained to Cherin that daddy doesn't wear cute things. The girl looked at him with very pitiful eyes and the man could not resist. A moment later, he was standing with horns and ears on his head and asked if it suited him. Cherin said he looked great. Suddenly, Ji Hoon heard a man and a woman talking about the father and daughter wearing deer antlers, and they thought it looked really cute. Ji Hoon thought it was nice to hear that after all the comments about how Ji Hoon was not like him. He looked at the girl and wondered when he would ever get to treat her like that again. Ji Hoon took a happy Cherin to the cash register and told her that today they would be reindeer. The fluffy snow continued to fall on the ground. Ji Hoon asked Cherin to tell him if she wanted to go somewhere. He began to tell her that Kids Village had rides for children and a zoo, they could see the animals and then have lunch at the cafe. Cherin pointed her finger in the direction of a certain attraction. It was a huge swing in the shape of an axe that swung to a great height. Cherin wanted to go there. The man was surprised. He explained to Cherin that it was an adult ride, and he promised to take his daughter there when she was older. The girl was surprised, but agreed. Then she asked to go on the roller coaster, but she was not allowed there either. Cherin was upset, because she wanted to go on a ride that went high, high into the sky. The man thought about it. He pointed to one of the rides and said that they could go there. After a while, it started snowing even more from the sky. A huge Ferris wheel stood out against the sky. Cherin looked through the glass of the booth in awe. Ji Hoon asked her if she liked it, and she said that she did, because they were very high up and could see the whole huge amusement park. Ji Hoon took out his phone and took a picture of his daughter. She asked what was in the distance. The girl looked very excited and sweet. Ji Hoon was touched. Cherin was so photogenic that any picture turned into a work of art. The girl was looking at everything around her. Ji Hoon didn't know when he would get to spend time with her like this again, so he decided to take more photos. After a while, Cherin happily looked at the rabbits sitting behind the fence. Then she and her dad ate sweets with joy. Later, they watched a magic show. They took pictures with a huge New Year's cat. They rode the carousel together. Cherin was looking at something with admiration. There was a huge, shiny, beautiful Christmas tree in front of them. While Cherin was looking at the tree, Ji Hoon took another photo of her. He looked at his phone. There were so many photos on it. He thought it was getting dark, so it was probably time to go home. He looked around, but Cherin was not there. Ji Hoon panicked and started calling for his daughter. He didn't understand where she had suddenly gone. Among the crowd, he finally saw Cherin. He thought that she was sad because her mother was not there. He approached Cherin, who was looking at something in surprise. The girl took her daddy's hand and said that he must be cold. She asked him to make her dad feel warm. Ji Hoon was surprised. Cherin pulled away from her father and asked him happily if he was warm. Ji Hoon sighed in surprise. Unbelievably, her words made his cold body and mood warm. Cherin looked at him and said that she had fun with him, and then asked him to come back here again. Ji Hoon was glad that she enjoyed it. He had no reason to be sad. He wanted Cherin to have fun, and everything went great. They stood by the Christmas tree, and Ji Hoon held out his little finger to Cherin and promised that they would come back here, but with her mom. Cherin gave him her little finger in return and happily agreed. It was still snowing outside. Ji Hoon and Cherin were lying in bed looking at pictures. The girl said that the sweets they ate were very tasty. The man promised to buy her more the next time they went there. Cherin commented on each photo. She said that she didn't even notice that the churros she was eating were sugar. They thought the huge bear on the scarf was very cute. So did the Christmas tree and the lights on it. Suddenly, Cherin shrieked and said that she liked one of the pictures the most. In the picture, Ji Hoon was holding Cherin in his arms and they were smiling. Cherin said she liked it because it was with her daddy. Ji Hoon was touched and asked if she really liked being photographed with him that much. The girl replied that she did, because it was always good to be with her dad. Then the man suggested that they take more photos together. The girl happily agreed. It was already dark outside, but the snow was still covering the ground. Ji Hoon was grateful for the day, because Cherin had fun. He hoped it would help her grow up happy. Surprisingly, the morning was very sunny. A bright-eyed Cherin woke up her dad because the sun was already up. Ji Hoon got up and asked her if she wanted to sleep some more, because she was tired at the amusement park yesterday. Cherin smiled and said she wasn't tired. Ji Hoon wondered why his daughter always woke up early. He had always thought that children usually slept a lot. The early morning sun shone through the window pane and flooded the whole room. Cherin asked him what he was thinking about. He told her that he was thinking about how beautiful his daughter was. Cherin hugged her father happily and asked if she was really beautiful. Ji Hoon replied that she was the most beautiful of all. Then the girl said that her dad was the best in the world. Ji Hoon reached for his glasses and said that he was going to make breakfast. The man started to get out of bed and suddenly winced in pain. He had hit his head. The man could not understand how he had managed to crack it. His eyes began to double. He thought his vision had deteriorated, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Cherin asked him if he was in pain. Ji Hoon replied that he was fine, he just bumped himself a little by accident. The man took off his glasses and decided to visit the ophthalmologist after breakfast. As Ji Hoon had planned, he went to an optical store. The doctor told him that his vision had improved. Ji Hoon stood in front of the ophthalmologist and did not understand how this was possible. The man in the white coat said that Ji Hoon's vision used to be -6, and now it was -4. It was like a miracle. There was a Snellen chart hanging in the office. The doctor thought that Ji Hoon had gone for laser vision correction. He denied it, because he hadn't done anything to his eyes at all. The doctor was embarrassed and adjusted his glasses. He advised Ji Hoon to go to an ophthalmology institute, because this fluctuation could be a symptom of a serious disease. Ji Hoon thought that all he needed was to ruin his eyesight. A woman in a white coat was sitting at a computer. She said that Ji Hoon had visited them before. She happily told Ji Hoon, who was sitting across from her, that his vision had improved to -3, which was a big difference. The man was surprised, because his ophthalmologist at the optical store had said he was -4. The woman was surprised and said that his myopia was adjusting so quickly on its own. Ji Hoon was worried. He thought it was bad. The doctor reassured him. This is, of course, a rare occurrence, but it is possible. There were a lot of glasses in the office behind the window. Ji Hoon asked if he needed new glasses then. The doctor replied that if his vision improved, he would have to change them more than once, but for now he needed to get new ones soon, and then they would look at the dynamics. Ji Hoon lay in bed and looked at his phone screen. He was looking for cases of improved vision, but there just never were any. Everyone had heard of sudden deterioration of vision, but never of sudden improvement. He thought that temporary improvements happened when you reduced the time spent in front of a monitor and using a smartphone, but this was definitely not the case for him. Ji Hoon put down his phone and decided to go for a walk because he was on vacation. You can't just lie around and do nothing all day. He was thinking of buying a new book for Cherin as well. He sat on the bed and asked Cherin, who was sitting at the table, if she wanted to go to the bookstore with him. Cherin happily put her hand up and said she did. She wants to read books. At the bookstore, Cherin's eyes were dazzled by the assortment. Ji Hoon told her to choose whatever she wanted and he would pay for it. He wondered what she might choose, maybe some fairy tales or comics. Suddenly, Cherin found what she wanted. She took a book from the shelf and said she wanted this one. Ji Hoon was a little surprised at her quick choice. But a moment later, Ji Hoon was overwhelmed when he saw which book Cherin wanted. The girl was happily holding a math book for preschoolers. The man asked her if she was sure about her choice. Cherin replied that it was an interesting book. Then he asked her, embarrassed, if she had ever studied math before. The happy girl replied that she hadn't, but she liked this book and wanted it. Ji Hoon took the book in his hands. He thought it was just money down the drain. She would probably read half a paragraph and then put it down forever. Then Ji Hoon held out his little finger to Cherin and asked her to promise him that she would read the book to the end. Cherin gave him her pinky back and agreed. Ji Hoon tried to choose another book for her as well. He thought that he would probably regret it, but he could buy one book, especially since he liked it so much. The father and daughter returned home. Ji Hoon hoped they had at least some food left in the fridge, because he wanted to get takeout, but he spent all his money on books. But Cherin was happy to be able to read her book. She flopped down on the bed and opened the book. Ji Hoon told her that while she was reading, he would make lunch. Ji Hoon opened the drawer and turned to the curious Cherin. He did not understand what could be interesting in this book. The man began to put food on the table. He thought that most kids hated math, and Cherin would probably give up on this book soon. Cherin approached Ji Hoon with the book in her hands. He invited her to the table because he had already prepared everything. Cherin opened the book in front of him and told him that she was done. Ji Hoon was petrified. He could not understand how she had solved all the problems. Cherin stood with the book open and smiled. She wanted her daddy to praise her. Ji Hoon couldn't imagine how she had managed to complete all the tasks. Her husband was sitting at the table with a book in his hands, confused and surprised. He did not believe that she had really solved everything. But Cherin asked him to believe. Ji Hoon looked at the correctly solved examples. These were exercises for preschoolers, and she had solved them all, but Cherin was not yet in the preparatory class. He was confused. He didn't make a single mistake. He thought that Yona had already taught Cherin how to add and subtract. Ji Hoon told Cherin that it was correct and asked if her mom had taught her. Cherin jumped for joy. She said she had learned it herself, from this book. Ji Hoon was surprised that Cherin could learn all this on her own and said that she was incredibly smart. The girl replied that she liked numbers and math because it was so much fun. Cherin danced and sang about being a math genius. Ji Hoon looked at her and thought that she really had a knack for it. Her husband was proud of her. This was another proof that she was his daughter, because he remembered being called a math genius as a child. He must have been. Ji Hoon suggested that Cherin have a lesson in the afternoon. He could teach her something new. The girl stopped dancing and was surprised. She started to be happy that her daddy would help her, thanked Ji Hoon and said he was the best. After a while, they were solving the last example. Ji Hoon asked how much is 14 plus 6 minus 3. They were sitting at the dining room table. Cherin happily raised her hand and said it was 17. Her husband praised her and said that she had learned addition and subtraction very well. Ji Hoon picked up the phone and thought that he should also explain division and multiplication to her. He didn't know if she would be able to memorize the multiplication table, but it was worth a try. He happily told Cherin that they were going to learn the multiplication table and asked her to repeat after him. The girl gladly agreed. There were various papers with examples and tables on the table. Ji Hoon taught Cherin the multiplication table by 2, and she repeated it clearly. After a while, they finished the table by 9, and Ji Hoon asked if Cherin had memorized anything. The girl, who had been listening attentively, said that she had memorized everything. Then Ji Hoon began to say that she would not be able to remember the first time and should repeat it again. Cherin interrupted him and confidently said that she had memorized everything. Ji Hoon was surprised. He could not believe that his daughter was so smart. Cherin stood up angrily and asked him what he had just said. Ji Hoon shouted. He hadn't realized he had said it out loud. Cherin was angry that her daddy didn't believe she was that smart. Ji Hoon started to deny it and say that he was just very surprised. She looked at him angrily and asked him if he didn't believe she was smart because she was Kim Cherin, Daddy's daughter, Kim Cherin. Ji Hoon was embarrassed and said that of course he believed in her abilities. Cherin angrily began to stretch the smile on Ji Hoon's surprised face with her fingers and told him that he should be happy and smile if he believed in her. The confused man began to say that he did believe in her and would smile. Satisfied, Cherin snorted, put her hands to her sides, and said that she had memorized the entire table. Ji Hoon smiled and offered to practice. Ji Hoon asked how many 4 by 6. Cherin confidently replied that it was 24. Then he asked her how many 7s would be. The girl smiled and answered 49. Several more examples were asked and Cherin gave the correct answer to all of them. Cherin said she had memorized everything. But Ji Hoon couldn't believe it, and he asked if she was sure her mom hadn't taught her. Cherin got angry again. She didn't understand why her dad didn't believe her. She was upset because she wasn't a liar, and Ji Hoon himself had said he believed in her. The man apologized and explained that he was just surprised because his daughter was amazing. Cherin wrapped herself in a blanket and turned away from Ji Hoon, who didn't know what to do. She said that she wouldn't believe him either, because her father's daughter was a liar. So she decided to curl up in the blanket and start to get offended. Excited, Ji Hoon began to say that this was not true and she was not a liar. He apologized to Cherin, asking her to forgive him, and said that he would always believe her. Cherin snorted under the covers. She turned angrily to him and told him never to doubt her. Ji Hoon folded his hands in front of him and promised that he would not doubt her and asked if she had forgiven him. The girl stood up and hugged Ji Hoon, and she couldn't help but forgive him because he was her dad. He thanked the girl very much and said that he had the best daughter in the world. As they hugged, Ji Hoon thought about how children her age learn multiplication. He couldn't understand it. Or maybe his daughter was just a genius. The sun lit up the houses and small balconies cast a long shadow. It was in this way that Ji Hoon realized, like many other parents, that his child was a genius. He decided to study math with her until Cherin started preschool. They started with something fun. There was a pile of math books on the table. Cherin calculated that 4 by 4 by 3.14 would be 50.24 square centimeters. She smiled and asked if she was right. She considered herself a math genius. Ji Hoon held the preschool textbook in his hands and could not believe it. Cherin could calculate the plane of a circle. She was only 6 years old, but she had learned the entire preschool math curriculum in just 1 month. Ji Hoon looked at the book, and there were various geometric shapes and examples on the pages. Cherin was solving not only ordinary but also the most difficult problems. The girl grasped everything on the go and had a very deep understanding of the theory. In her dreamy father's imagination, Cherin stood with a huge cup in her hands. He believed that with such skills she could win a philosophy prize. She would be the youngest person to receive this title. Ji Hoon looked at the little smiling Cherin and could not understand how she had such genetic aptitude for the exact sciences. The man thought about it. He had a very ordinary level of intelligence, and as far as he remembered, so did Yona. He had once read that genius children are born regardless of heredity. It seemed to be true. When Ji Hoon found out that Cherin was a prodigy, he had another problem. The man looked at the screen in search of a school for gifted children. He didn't know what kind of education would be best for her. Ji Hoon sat at his desk and looked at his daughter. He had been desperate since he found out how smart she was. He thought that if Yona was with them, they could think about it together. Ji Hoon looked at his phone, which was off. Yona had sent the money and that was it. He still couldn't reach her. He didn't know what to do if the woman just didn't pick up the phone. Ji Hoon leaned back in his chair. He thought about the choice he had to make that would affect Cherin's future. It was very difficult to make a decision on his own. Cherin was lying on the bed with a pencil in her hand, doing math problems. Ji Hoon thought that the new year was coming soon, so they would go to his parents' house and he would consult them. The New Year's Eve holiday had begun. The sun was blinding everything around. Ji Hoon's parents were happy to see Cherin. She missed them very much. Ji Hoon's father told them they were good for coming and asked if they had been stuck in traffic. Ji Hoon answered embarrassedly that it was not that far to Suwon, there were no traffic jams, and he hoped that there would not be any now. His father came to the car door and told everyone to get in, because it was a long way to go. Ji Hoon's mother and Cherin sat in the back. The woman was pleasantly surprised that her Cherin knew how to fasten her seatbelt herself. She praised the girl for it. Cherin replied that it was her mom who taught her to buckle up when riding in the car. Suddenly, Cherin looked at her grandmother and said that her daddy was studying math with her. The woman was surprised, because it was too early for such a science. Ji Hoon turned to his mother and said that Cherin was a smart girl because she had learned the whole preschool program in 3 weeks. The father was surprised. He did not believe that this was possible. Cherin was offended again and snorted because her grandfather did not believe her either. They were driving fast on the road. Ji Hoon said in embarrassment that he would not lie to his parents. His father thought about it and said that it meant their granddaughter was really that smart. Ji Hoon said that this was worrying. The father didn't understand it. He thought it was better to have a child who was smart than to have a child who was stupid. The man began to say, embarrassed, that he had to give Cherin a proper education that would develop her talents, and he asked if his parents had any ideas. His father wasn't sure, because he had never had to raise a genius. Ji Hoon could not deny it. His mother was a little worried, and she thought that there was no need to rush, because he needed to give himself time to think about such a difficult decision. Ji Hoon embarrassedly agreed. Huge buildings loomed over their car. Ji Hoon thought that this was a problem, because he had no one to discuss the matter with. If only he could get hold of Jonah. Different voices were heard in the house they arrived at. Everyone had finally seen Ji Hoon's daughter, about whom he had talked so much. Several people stood by Cherin and admired her beauty. The girl smiled and introduced herself, saying her name was Kim Cherin. The woman turned to Ji Hoon and asked him with a smile if he was sure that Ji Hoon was his daughter, because it was not his set of genes. The woman was Ji Hoon's cousin. The man was embarrassed to ask if he spoke to his cousin about his children in this way and said that she was indeed his daughter. Suddenly they looked around because a boy was talking to Ji Hoon. He was surprised that Ji Hoon still hadn't gotten through to Cherin's mother and said that he was like a hillbilly and maybe it would be better to contact a private detective. The guy's name was Ji Hoon. Ji Hoon looked at the guy menacingly and asked what he meant. Ji Hoon asked him equally menacingly if it had ever occurred to Ji Hoon that something might have happened to the girl's mother. It was getting dark outside. Ji Hoon said he would think about it. Ji Hoon was outraged, because when a person disappears, the passage of time speeds up dramatically. Ji Hoon turned away from him. He didn't know what to do. He thought about calling him a hillbilly and wondered if he looked stupid. Ji Hoon went outside. It was already dark. He thought that on the other hand, Ji Hoon was right and he should ask Cherin about her mom. Suddenly, the little girl looked outside and asked in surprise what her daddy was doing here. The man shouted and asked why she had come out. It was cold. She ran up to him and hugged him, and the girl came out to warm her dad, because Cherin never gets cold. Ji Hoon was touched that Cherin was taking care of him. His daughter was such a good girl. He wondered if he was the reason she couldn't express her kindness. He pulled Cherin away from him and asked if she missed her mom. The girl deflated. She thought about it for a while, smiled, and replied that she did miss her mom. Ji Hoon thought about it. She had been keeping it all to herself all this time, and he decided to discuss it with her when they got back. Suddenly, his phone rang in his pocket. Ji Hoon wondered who was calling on his day off. The man looked at the screen and froze. It was Bae Young calling him. Ji Hoon put the phone to his ear. A little scared, he asked if it was really Yona calling him. The woman replied that it was her. Who else could be calling him from this number? Ji Hoon began to yell at her because she kept not answering the phone. Cherin stood behind him, scared. She turned to her father. Ji Hoon just looked at her and continued talking to Yona. He was angry. He asked her where she was and why she didn't answer her phone. She replied that she was very far away. There was thick, flaky snow falling where the woman was. She could not say where she was. Ji Hoon began to suspect that she had debts and was now in hiding. The woman denied it, because she had sent him alimony and a large amount of money. Then Ji Hoon asked her if she missed Cherin. Yona remained silent. But after a few seconds, she answered that of course she did. She also told the worried Ji Hoon that she missed him because she loved them both very much. After these words, Ji Hoon got the answer to the question that had been tormenting him since Cherin appeared. He began to remember all the good moments with her and realized that he had accepted Cherin as his daughter because he still had feelings for Yona despite the fact that they hadn't seen each other for many years. He was angry with the woman for suddenly disappearing when everything was going well, and now she says she loves him after 7 years of absence. Concerned, Ji Hoon said he had an important question for Yona. He looked at the surprised Cherin. He didn't want to ask, but otherwise he wouldn't understand. Ji Hoon asked if Yona had left Cherin for another man. The woman began to say angrily that Ji Hoon was not in his right mind. The woman could see a big blue sea in front of her, and her hair was covered with snow. She said that there was only him and Cherin in her life and she would never leave them. She began to say that if he ever said something like that again, even jokingly, she would do bad things to him. Ji Hoon was embarrassed and apologized. Yona turned to her worried husband again, her hair blowing in the winter wind. She said that she loved him and her daughter and asked him to trust her and just wait a little longer. Again, Yona spoke to the distraught husband. The winter wind blew her hair as she expressed her love for him and their daughter. She asked him to believe her and to just wait a little longer. Ji Hoon then asked the woman to answer another question. He asked when she would be able to explain everything to him. Yona wasn't sure, but she promised to tell him everything in time. She asked Ji Hoon to trust her and wait for her. Ji Hoon sighed and asked Yona to promise. She did so. Ji Hoon remembered what he had said about Cherin being very smart. She was happy to hear that. The man said he didn't think it was just because she was their daughter. He thought Cherin was a prodigy. Ji Hoon asked Yona what she thought about sending her to a school for gifted children. The woman replied that he could send her there if she wanted to, and asked Ji Hoon to remember that nothing would work if it wasn't Cherin's own desire. Yona said that Ji Hoon may not know Cherin well, but she is actually a very stubborn girl. Cherin looked at her father with interest. She did not know what it meant to be stubborn. Ji Hoon didn't know which of them was telling the truth. He told Yona that he would do everything he could for her anyway, but he couldn't be home all the time. He would find a job soon. Ji Hoon told Yona that he needed her here. The woman replied that she would send money so that Ji Hoon could hire a nurse for Cherin. The man did not understand her words. She repeated that Ji Hoon should hire a tutor for her because she needed to study. The man started to get angry, and Yona asked him how much money he needed for that. Ji Hoon was angry, telling the woman that they were talking about Cherin's future and that temporary solutions were not appropriate. Yona replied that she couldn't come anyway, because she had already told him. The man didn't let her finish. He knew she was in some kind of accursed situation. Cherin was scared. Ji Hoon continued to say that he would raise the child alone, and Yona would have to explain everything to her daughter later. The woman wanted to say that she didn't mean it, but Ji Hoon hung up the phone. The man was desperate. He didn't want to hang up and thought he should call her back. Suddenly, Cherin asked about the fight. Ji Hoon turned to her. He embarrassedly walked over to the girl and asked if she thought it was because she was scared that her dad was yelling, and then apologized. Cherin asked him not to fight with her mom. Desperate, Ji Hoon realized that he had shown Cherin his bad side and realized that he could not make such scenes in front of her anymore. The man said that the girl was probably cold and took her inside, promising that her daddy would be back soon. Ji Hoon picked up the phone again and dialed Yona. He wanted to apologize to her. He was told that the caller could not accept his call. He was surprised. He did not believe that she could block him so suddenly and decided to dial again. He smiled as he waited to hear from her, but the caller again said that the caller could not take his call. These words ran through his head. Ji Hoon was almost crying when he realized that she had blocked him. The phone repeated the same phrase again. He scolded himself, because how could he end the only call he had ever had like that? If only he had known that he would not be able to reach her again, he would have told her that he loved her too. Suddenly his eyes rounded with surprise and he looked at the phone screen. Yona had texted him. She apologized for giving the impression that she was taking this situation very lightly, but in fact she had thought it through. She added that she would like to call them more often and talk to Cherin, but that it was a bit difficult for her. She asked Ji Hoon to write to her and she would reply any time. Ji Hoon wrote to ask if she was telling the truth. Yona replied that of course it was true. She would send money for Cherin, and if Ji Hoon could not find a tutor for her, she could at least buy her some books. The man thought about it. She really wanted to hire a tutor, but it was a lot of money every month. He did not understand where Yona would get that kind of money. As far as he remembered, the woman did not have a rich, ordinary family. He began to suspect that Yona had started doing something illegal. He decided to ask her about it and wrote her a message. Yona did not understand what he was talking about. She reminded him that she was from a rich family and that her family gave her the money, so he didn't have to worry. Ji Hoon thought that her family was giving her as much as his monthly salary, which was a lot of money. Ji Hoon thought this was suspicious. He decided to ask Cherin tomorrow where she lived, because children would not lie. In the morning, the sun was peeking through the white clouds that covered the sky. The sun's rays made their way to the roofs of the buildings. Cherin happily told me that her mom's house was very, very big. She said that when she was little, she would sometimes get lost in it, but her uncle would always find her. Ji Hoon held the box in his hands and marveled at her story. He imagined a huge castle and a man with a monocle. It sounded incredible. Even if you win the lottery, it's impossible to live in such luxury. Ji Hoon wondered who Yona's parents were. Ji Hoon's mother came over to them and asked if something had happened to Yona, because she had heard that they had talked about her with her parents yesterday. Ji Hoon smiled and replied that his mother shouldn't worry, that Yona had called him and said that she was fine. Then my mom asked if he would tell her anything, and Ji Hoon smiled and said no, because she had important family matters. The man couldn't get the thought out of his head that if Yona's family was so rich that they lived in a castle, then it was possible that they were in a war over their inheritance. It was the only logical thought. Cherin told her daddy that she had seen many stars in the sky at night and that she had had a very tasty dinner yesterday. She liked it. She asked her dad to come here more often. Ji Hoon patted Cherin on the head and said that they would definitely come back. He looked at Cherin's joy and decided to teach her on his own for the time being. Everyone was returning home by car. Ji Hoon had no hurry. He had a long vacation and the opportunity to be with Cherin. A week has passed since the new year. Ji Hoon began to see poorly with his glasses on, so he went to the ophthalmologist again. And what he heard? The female doctor was embarrassed. She adjusted the glasses and said that now Ji Hoon had +1 vision in both eyes. The man was dumbfounded. He did not understand how this could happen. The woman took him by the hands and asked him to study his case and write a dissertation. She could not miss this opportunity. Ji Hoon agreed, of course, but he didn't understand whether he needed to wear glasses or not. The doctor looked at him in surprise. She said it was obvious. Ji Hoon no longer needed glasses or their services. The man did not know what to say. He did not understand how this was possible. He was overwhelmed with joy and was shaking in his chair. After 15 years of wearing glasses all the time, this was real happiness. The weather outside was clear as usual. Ji Hoon walked along the sidewalk. He wondered how this was possible. Then he stopped. Ji Hoon thought that he had never seen so clearly without his glasses. He looked at his reflection in the window. He thought that his friends would be very surprised and most likely think that he had had laser correction. Now he could see. He looked pretty good without his glasses. Ji Hoon admired himself to the strange looks of passers-by. Suddenly, the man was frightened. He suddenly received a phone call from Jiangsu. He asked why Ji Hoon had been so hard to reach lately, and he was worried that Ji Hoon had hit the fan. Ji Hoon asked why Jiangsu, after they hadn't talked for a month, had asked if he was alive. The man asked his friend not to worry, and if he decided to die, he would ask the former to bury Jiangsu in his will. The guy couldn't understand where Ji Hoon was all this time, and he was beginning to think that he was having family problems. The man could not say that everything was fine. He decided to teach Cherin at home. Jiangsu thought about it. He asked if Ji Hoon was planning to get married. The man was stunned by this question. Ji Hoon joked and said that he was going to marry twice. Then his friend asked why he didn't come to the university. The man had other reasons. Suddenly he thought why he was hiding Cherin from his friends. After all, she was his legitimate daughter. He quickly told Jiangsu that if he was so interested in knowing, he should come to his house and say goodbye. Then Ji Hoon thought that even though he invited him, Jiangsu can make a circus out of anything and maybe he shouldn't have invited him. Ji Hoon opened the door and told Cherin that he was back. The girl was happy to see him. She noticed that her dad didn't have his glasses and said that it looked good on him without them. Ji Hoon blushed. Cherin smiled and said that his glasses were very thick. Ji Hoon was embarrassed. He thought his glasses were stylish. Children are very direct sometimes. Cherin put her fingers up and said that he was very handsome now. She hugged her dad and asked him not to wear glasses anymore. Ji Hoon smiled and said that daddy would go without them now. Then he asked what his daughter had been doing all day. Cherin answered that she was doing math and then saw an interesting thing on the computer called MeTube. She happily said that she was watching beautiful oppa dancing. Ji Hoon realized that it was probably Baze, a popular K-pop group. Cherin put her hand to her heart and confidently said that she would make her dad be as cool as them. Ji Hoon scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. He said it would be difficult, but he thanked her for her efforts. Cherin got angry thinking that Daddy didn't believe her again and said she would make him cool anyway. Ji Hoon raised his hands and thanked her and said he believed her. He thought that it would be good to be cool for his daughter. Then he thought that he should pay attention to his appearance. It was getting dark outside. Pink clouds hung over the houses. Ji Hoon asked what Cherin would like for dinner. She said that she wanted her daddy to cook something. It was always delicious. The man looked at her and asked her to wait a little while Daddy cooked something. He opened the refrigerator and wondered what side dish to choose. Suddenly, Cherin said that someone was at the door. Ji Hoon didn't know who it could be. Jang-soo was standing on the doorstep with two guys. They were holding bags of drinks. Ji Hoon did not expect him to come on the same day. Cherin asked curiously who these men were. Ji Hoon embarrassedly replied that they were friends of her father's and asked if she would mind if they had dinner with them. Cherin thought that they were poor if they came to eat with him, and her mother had taught her that you should help the poor. Ji Hoon thought that the students were really poor people and mentally apologized to the boys. Ji Hoon opened the door. Chang-soo was complaining that he almost died of cold. Suddenly he was numb with cold. The beautiful Cherin stood in front of him, surprised. Chang-soo could not move. The boys began to ask him why he was not coming in and how much longer they would be cold. Chang-soo suddenly shouted that he saw an elf. The boys were surprised and thought that Chang-soo's brain was frozen. They told him to go inside and shut up. But suddenly the boys were also frozen. They also saw the beautiful Cherin. They didn't know what to say. Then Chang-soo asked Ji Hoon in horror who the little elf was. The man put his arms around the smiling Cherin and said that she was his daughter. Chang-soo looked at Ji Hoon closely and asked him to tell him who it was without joking. Ji Hoon was embarrassed to say that it was indeed his daughter and asked him to take his word for it. The girl took her father's hand with her two small hands. She smiled and politely said that her name was Kim Cherin and she was indeed her daddy's daughter. The men could not believe it. Chang-soo thought she was a foster child. Ji Hoon was outraged and asked him to watch his language in front of the child. He explained that she was his biological child and asked why he had come and what was in the packages. Chang-soo embarrassedly replied that Ji Hoon had invited him, so he came. He was worried about him being here and thought they could have a drink. Ji Hoon said that they would not drink in front of the child. Jang-soo scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and said that he didn't know about it. He said that 2 months ago Ji Hoon lived alone and asked how he managed to have a child in 2 months. The man replied that there was no point in talking to them and decided to show them the document. He handed the men a paternity test and told them to read it. They were surprised. It was really true. Then Jang-soo started asking if Ji Hoon understood why it was hard for them to believe it. No one in their position would have believed it when they heard that a man had suddenly had a child. Cherin was standing next to them. She said she wouldn't have believed it either. Ji Hoon asked her in embarrassment why she was standing next to them. Then Ji Hoon said that it was his fault for not explaining everything to them from the beginning. He invited the men to come in and said he would explain everything over dinner. The men were sitting in Ji Hoon's apartment. They were surprised that he hadn't seen Cherin's mother for 7 years. Jang-soo said that the girl was very beautiful and that her mother was probably beautiful too. Then he asked if they had any photos. Ji Hoon replied that there were no photos, but that Cherin's mom was really beautiful. Jang-soo thought about it. He said that Ji Hoon was lucky that Cherin didn't look like him. He had heard that the first girl looked like her father, and if she had inherited his looks. Ji Hoon heroically slapped Chang-soo and said that he had been asking for it for a long time. The men sat at the table in astonishment, and Cherin smiled. Jang-soo asked why Ji Hoon was doing this to him, because he knew it was a joke. The guys started to say that Ji Hoon has been looking better lately, and with the way he looks now, people would more easily believe that Ji Hoon is his daughter. They also noticed that he didn't have glasses and asked about laser correction. Ji Hoon blushed. He replied that his eyesight had improved recently, so he didn't need glasses anymore. It was the first time he had heard that since he started raising Cherin. He was flattered. Cherin smiled and said that her daddy was the most handsome man in the world. The men also smiled at her and said she was very nice. If they had a daughter like her, they would blow dust off her. Ji Hoon decided to show off. Just a month ago, Cherin had just learned to count, and now she was solving quadratic equations. The boys were surprised. They did not understand how this was possible. Ji Hoon was outraged that no one believed him, and Cherin confidently said that she could really do it. Then one of the boys embarrassedly wrote an example and asked Cherin to solve it. Cherin asked him to wait a bit and concentrated. She happily handed the paper back to the men and asked them if it was correct. The men were surprised. One of them said that when he was Cherin's age, he only liked to poop. Jang-soo jokingly asked if he didn't like to pee. Cherin jumped up and down and said she was smart and beautiful. Chan-soo jokingly started pushing Ji Hoon and said that Cherin was very smart and if he raised her properly, he would have a happy old age. While Jang-soo was joking, Ji Hoon thought that he really needed to raise her properly, but she was too smart for him to do it alone. He looked at Cherin, who was solving problems and surprising the boys with her abilities. The man thought that while he would finish his PhD, Cherin would study the entire high school course. One day he would have nothing to tell her. And then it would probably be time to send her to a school for gifted children. Suddenly, Jang-soo whispered to Ji Hoon to listen to him. He said that the university held an Olympiad for gifted children every April and asked if he could enroll Cherin. Ji Hoon was outraged. Why would a 7-year-old go to a university Olympiad? Jang-soo confidently said he had connections and asked Ji Hoon to trust him. Ji Hoon didn't really expect any of this, but he told his friend to do what he could. The weather was clear in the morning. White clouds floated in the sky. Ji Hoon's phone rang. It was Woo Chang-soo. He was wearing a towel around his neck. He answered the phone and the man on the phone asked him to meet him on Friday. Ji Hoon asked why. The man said he had an appointment with a professor who would be on the jury. Cherin needed to test before the Olympics. Ji Hoon wondered if his friend had done this for him. Jang-soo replied that he could move a little for Ji Hoon's sake, so that he could owe him a favor. The professor wanted to see Cherin's abilities in person. Ji Hoon agreed, as he had no plans on Friday anyway. Jang-soo said he would pass on his agreement. Ji Hoon was a little worried. Cherin was a genius, of course, but he was a little worried that she was in for a real test. What if he had overestimated her abilities? Ji Hoon was sweating with worry. But he changed his mind, because solving quadratic equations at the age of 7 is brilliant. Suddenly, he saw himself standing in front of a professor who said that quadratic equations are nothing for a genius at that age, that geniuses are capable of doing mathematical analysis. He thought that perhaps his measure of genius was too low. Cherin asked her dreamy father what he was thinking about. She smiled and looked at him. Ji Hoon decided that he shouldn't worry so much. No matter what happened, Cherin would always be his daughter. He thought that he shouldn't look insecure and worry in front of her. Ji Hoon hugged Cherin and told her that he loved her even if she was not a genius. The girl replied that she loved him too. It was Friday afternoon. A building stood tall in the sky. A woman looked at Cherin and said that she was pleased to meet her. She introduced herself as Professor Baek Na-hai, but the girl could just call her Professor Baek. A happy Cherin agreed and said it was nice to meet her as well. The woman turned to Ji Hoon and said that his daughter was a smart girl and she had prepared test questions for her. Ji Hoon thanked her and said he wouldn't interrupt. Cherin sat down on a chair. The professor asked her to solve everything she could and she had an hour. Ji Hoon was worried. Cherin had never tried to solve problems for an hour before, and he did not know if she would be able to concentrate for long. After a while, Cherin brought the papers she was writing on to the professor and said that she had already solved everything. The woman said that Cherin was a very diligent girl and had solved all the problems, but she needed to check their correctness. She asked Ji Hoon to wait a little longer. The man hoped for the best. The scale of expectation began to rise. He began to calm himself down, because if he hoped for the best, it would be painful to be disappointed. His expectation level began to decrease. Cherin happily told her dad that she hoped for a good outcome. He smiled and said that he still loved her no matter what the outcome. Cherin said she loved her daddy too and made a heart with her hands above her head. Suddenly, the professor came out and said she had checked the test. The scale of expectation went up to the maximum and Ji Hoon didn't know what to do. He wondered what Cherin's score was. The sun was shining through the windows. The professor said that Cherin had taken the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test. This is the most reliable modern test that shows the level of intelligence. The excited woman said that the margin of error is usually plus or minus 16 points. Cherin's score was 150. This score means that Cherin is a true genius, of which there are only 0.04%. Ji Hoon was shocked. His daughter is a real genius. The professor noted that the girl also showed a high score in terms of socialization. She will have great success in the future. Cherin was beaming with joy. A happy Ji Hoon thanked the professor. She asked if he had ever thought about sending the girl to a school for gifted children. The surprised man said that he had, but that usually children older than Cherin study there. The professor said that some of these schools have elementary grades, usually starting in the 6th grade. She thought Cherin had a chance of getting in. Ji Hoon turned to his daughter and asked if she wanted to go to such a school. The girl replied that if she could go there with her dad, she would. Ji Hoon explained to Cherin that he would not be able to attend school with her. She replied that she didn't want to go to school without her dad. Cherin sat there furious. The man embarrassedly explained to the professor that Cherin's opinion was the most important. The woman smiled and said she understood, but if she changed her mind, she asked him to call her back. She would then help find an institution that would accept the girl. The father and daughter left the office. Jiangsu rushed to them, burning with curiosity. Ji Hoon replied that Cherin's results had broken through the ceiling. That was all he could say. Jiangsu was impressed. He asked for Professor Beck's response. Ji Hoon replied that the professor had recommended that Cherin be sent to a school for the gifted, but the girl refused and he would not force her. The men were in a good mood. Jiangsu thought that Cherin would be the first child in Korea to win the Nobel Prize. Ji Hoon replied that maybe the girl would want to be such a child someday and patted her on the head. They were passing a vending machine when Jiangsu asked what course Ji Hoon would choose. The man replied that he would have to change his schedule because he had no one to stay home with Cherin. Suddenly, Jiangsu had a brilliant idea. He asked if Ji Hoon would like to take his daughter to class with him. The man thought about it and replied that it would be boring for her. Cherin began to protest because she wanted to go to class with her dad. Ji Hoon asked her if she could sit in one place for 2 hours. Cherin enthusiastically replied that she watches movies for 2 hours and doesn't get tired, so she could sit in class. Ji Hoon agreed, but said that if she got bored, he wouldn't take her again. Happy Cherin hugged her father and agreed. She kissed the happy Ji Hoon on the cheek and said that he was the best. While Cherin was kissing her dad and telling him that she loved him very much, Jiangsu was surprised and thought that Ji Hoon's cheeks were smeared with honey. Before the classes started, Ji Hoon decided to teach Cherin English. She showed her genius even in this. Cherin sat at the table and read Kima led police and prosecutors to a remote coastal area. Her husband was very impressed. He taught her only the most basic rules of grammar, and within a week she was able to write at a high school level. Soon she would be able to speak like a native speaker. Ji Hoon thought that he had nothing more to teach Cherin. Maybe he should really hire the tutor that Yona had sent money for. He couldn't figure out which subject was better. In Korean, English, and math, Cherin had long been ahead. Suddenly, the girl told her dad to look at a cool auntie. There was a picture of a woman at a piano on a sheet of paper. Cherin said that this woman was a pianist and she asked who pianists were. Suddenly Ji Hoon realized. He explained to Cherin that pianists are people who play the piano and asked if she wanted to learn how to play it too. Cherin happily replied that the piano was cool and she wanted to learn with her daddy. The man explained in embarrassment that he did not have time to learn, but perhaps the girl wanted to go to music school. Cherin replied irritably that she was not interested without her dad. Then he asked if she wanted to learn math. Cherin replied that she would only if her dad taught her. Ji Hoon then asked what the girl wanted to study. An illuminated Cherin replied that she wanted to learn from her dad because he was interesting. The man basically thought so. Suddenly, Ji Hoon wondered what if she would only want to do what she could do with him. He wanted to be with her, but he couldn't stay at home all the time. Cherin ran into her dad's arms and told him he was the best. The disappointed man thought that to understand what she needed, he would have to try different things. But he had neither the time nor the money. Suddenly he had a thought. There is a way to introduce her to different areas of life without having to delve into them. Ji Hoon asked Cherin if she wanted to go to the library, where she could read books and then find what she liked best. The girl was surprised. But when she realized that they would be together with her dad, she happily agreed. The weather was clear when Ji Hoon and Cherin arrived at the library. The woman who worked there embarrassedly explained that Cherin was too young and they couldn't let her in the library because children are noisy and the library is not supposed to be noisy. Ji Hoon embarrassedly explained that they had nowhere else to go to read, and if Cherin started making noise, they would definitely leave the library. The woman agreed. Ji Hoon and Cherin thanked her, and the girl said she would make sure that her dad didn't make any noise. The man asked his daughter again if she understood the rules, and Cherin told him to be quiet, and she replied that she did. People at the bookstand suddenly started turning around. Ji Hoon and Cherin were walking through the library and all eyes were on them. A man whispered to his daughter that she should pick out all the books she liked. Cherin thought about it and started walking forward. The girl took a book from the shelf and whispered that she liked it. Cherin opened the book and went back to her daddy. The people around her looked at her. Ji Hoon was also choosing a book. He noticed the stares and it was expected for him. But she is interested here because the library has a huge number of books. Suddenly, his phone rang in his pocket. Ji Hoon took it out to see who was calling. He was very surprised because it was Professor Jang Dong-ho calling him. Ji Hoon touched Cherin's shoulder. The girl turned to him and her dad whispered that he would answer the call. Cherin stared at the screen of Ji Hoon's phone. She was furious. Was that professor calling again to scold her dad? Ji Hoon went outside and picked up the phone. Suddenly, the man cringed as he screamed. The professor was shouting that Ji Hoon was a bitch and a rat and asked if he had done it. Ji Hoon did not understand what the professor was saying. Jang Dong-ho started shouting again, asking if Ji Hoon had suddenly reported him to the police for embezzling the budget. The man still could not understand what the professor was talking about. Jang Dong-ho continued to accuse Ji Hoon of being a bitch, and that it was he who reported that the professor had embezzled the money given to the university for research for the Hatch Group. He added that he would make Ji Hoon's life merry for snitching. The man was furious and thought the professor was a jerk. Ji Hoon wanted to address him as Professor Chan, but the professor interrupted him and said that he was Jang Dong-ho to him. Ji Hoon calmly said that he did not know what evidence the investigation had, but that he and the other lab workers should still testify against him. The professor was furious. He called Ji Hoon a son of a bitch and asked him how dare he threaten him. Ji Hoon calmly replied that the professor could call him whatever he wanted, but he didn't dare call his parents dogs. Jang Dong-ho continued to shout at the angry Ji Hoon that his parents must be dogs if they could give birth to such a bastard, and that Ji Hoon had no education because he had no respect for his elders. The angry man wanted to say a few kind words to the professor, but he didn't have time. Someone tugged on his jacket. Ji Hoon turned around in surprise and saw Cherin. The man told the professor that he would not talk to trash like him and hung up. Upset, Cherin asked if he was okay. Embarrassed, Ji Hoon smiled and said that everything was fine. He asked her why she had left, as she was supposed to be reading. Upset, the girl replied that she didn't want to read anymore, but wanted to go home. Ji Hoon was surprised, but agreed. He wanted to tell the professor to stop talking, but he couldn't do it in front of Cherin. He thought that the professor had told him about the embezzlement of research fees and that it was worth finding out more about. After a while, they returned home. Ji Hoon told Jang-soo about the professor's embezzlement and asked what he could know about it. The man was sitting in a chair and talking on the phone. Jang-soo told him that the professor was capable of such a thing, but he wondered what had happened and why Ji Hoon was asking about it. The man told his friend about the conversation. Jang-soo was furious, and he asked Ji Hoon if he should check the records. Ji Hoon said yes, and that he would come to the lab tomorrow. Ji Hoon hung up the phone and thought that he had a lot to do tomorrow, so he should take Cherin to his parents' house. He asked the girl, embarrassed, if she wanted to go to her grandmother's house tomorrow, because he would be very busy tomorrow. Upset, Cherin asked if he would be very, very busy. Ji Hoon said yes, and asked her to stay at her grandmother's tomorrow. Cherin was outraged and said she wanted to be with her dad. The man patted his daughter's head and said that he wanted to be with her too. But he could not be there all the time, and Cherin had to understand that. Cherin was upset. Still, she agreed. She didn't want to be alone with her dad, but she had no choice. Ji Hoon thanked her for her understanding and said good night. The little girl lay down next to him and sobbed. It was the middle of the night. Ji Hoon was sleeping soundly. Suddenly Cherin woke up, her eyes filled with anger. Once again, a glow appeared from her hands. She pointed it at Ji Hoon and asked him to be healthy and sleep well. The radiance enveloped the man. The blue glow lifted Cherin out of bed. She said that it was time to punish sinners. Her eyes shone with fury. She had to get to Chan Dong-ho's house. The blurry space in front of Cherin began to become clearer. She was in the professor's house, but no one was there. She didn't understand where he could be. She asked the shining light that was enveloping her to show her where the professor was. The jets of light began to intertwine in different patterns. Cherin saw the professor. Instantly she disappeared, leaving the light behind. There were bars on the window. Alcohol bottles were scattered around. The professor promised to strangle all those who had put him up to it. Cherin was behind him. The professor was sitting on the floor in his t-shirt in a pile of bottles and promised to give everyone a sweet life after what they had done. He was holding a glass and promising that everyone would be washed in blood. Cherin was thinking about what punishment to choose for him. She wanted to humiliate the professor in front of everyone. Suddenly, the bottle flew into the wall and broke into pieces. The furious professor promised to kill everyone. He held his head and promised to strangle everyone with his own hands. Cherin was still watching him. She knew that he would soon break down. He was aggressive, and this could not be left unchecked. A purple glow appeared from her hands and began to approach the professor. Cherin's work was complete. The glow enveloped the angry Chan Dong-ho. She wanted to punish him herself, but it was forbidden. Cherin didn't want to, but she had somewhere else to go. The glow carried the girl over the sleeping city. Today she had things to do all night. In the morning, Ji Hoon took his daughter to his parents' house. Cherin almost cried and begged her father not to go. Ji Hoon's parents were worried. The man said that Cherin had promised to stay with her grandmother. He could not stay. Ji Hoon asked Yeon to stop tormenting him. He had to go, because he couldn't let the thief Jang Dong-ho be free and dangerous. He then asked Cherin, who was in despair, if there was anything that was bothering her. The girl hugged her dad and said that everything was fine. She had always obeyed him and would do her best this time. Ji Hoon thanked her and asked her to obey her grandparents. The father asked his son to stay out of trouble. The mother agreed and asked Ji Hoon to be careful. They were worried. The man asked them not to worry and to look after Cherin. The girl looked at the door behind which her daddy had disappeared. She knew that he didn't need to do anything, because that man would soon break down. She couldn't tell her dad about it, and it made her feel bad. She scratched the back of her head and said she wanted to play with her dad. Ji Hoon arrived at the lab. Jang-soo and the boys were already waiting for him. The men were outraged because the professor had also called them with threats. They were furious. Ji Hoon asked if they had found any information. Jang-soo found a financial report on the professor's computer and invited everyone to look at it. Ji Hoon was surprised. He was amazed at the amount of money stolen and did not understand how he had gone unpunished so far. Jang-soo suggested looking at other orders. He was sure that the statute of limitations had not yet expired for a bunch of the professor's crimes. The men agreed and set to work. It was already starting to get dark outside. Ji Hoon thought the professor was crazy because there was embezzlement from every project. Suddenly, Jang-soo nervously called everyone to him. The men gathered around Jang-soo. On the computer screen, they saw a news story titled "Revenge for Reporting Sexual Harassment to Police." It described that a 47-year-old professor had attempted to murder a student and was arrested. It was definitely Jang Dong-ho. Jang-soo noticed that the news was all over the news and social media. It meant that the professor had attacked Yerim with a knife. Jang-soo said it was hard to believe, but it was good that the victim was not injured. Ji Hoon was embarrassed. It was good that Yerim was not hurt, but murder. No one expected the professor to be so crazy. Then one of the guys started to worry about what if the professor came after them, what if they tried to testify against him. They were all worried. Ji Hoon thought about the fact that he had a daughter and he did not want to end his life like that. The men spent the whole day rummaging through the archives. Suddenly, Ji Hoon suggested that they select the files they needed and send them to the police by email. Let them use them if necessary. Then the men decided to end the search and go out to eat. At the same time, they decided to drink beer and scold Jang Dong-ho. Jang-soo said that he knew that the professor would commit some kind of crime sooner or later. Ji Hoon thought that he would like to take revenge on the professor, but he dug his own grave. He was still angry, but it was good that everything ended well. It was already getting dark outside when Ji Hoon picked up Cherin. She asked him, somewhat upset, if Daddy had been drinking, because he smelled like alcohol. The man was embarrassed to ask if he really smelled like that, because he had only had a little bit to drink. Cherin started to get angry and asked him not to drink anymore, because alcohol is bad for your health. Ji Hoon agreed. Then she asked him if he had done what he wanted to do. Ji Hoon smiled and was surprised by her question. He wanted to talk to someone about it, but he didn't know if he should tell Cherin. Cherin started to get angry. She said she would be hurt if her dad didn't tell her. Ji Hoon apologized and promised to tell her. They walked down the street. The man asked if Ji Hoon remembered that Daddy wanted to punish Jang Dong-ho. But this man made a big mistake and now he was arrested by the police. Ji Hoon said in embarrassment that everything he wanted to do was unnecessary. The professor had made things worse for himself. He was satisfied with what had happened, but the man was annoyed. Cherin proudly said that she had told her dad that this would happen even if Ji Hoon hadn't done anything. The man was surprised and asked if the girl knew about it. Cherin happily threw up her hands and said that bad things always happen to bad people. She told the surprised father not to worry. Cherin would always protect him. Ji Hoon thanked her. The man thought that she was being supportive again, and it was great that he had Cherin. The girl happily said that she would give her dad a massage. Ji Hoon happily replied that in that case they should hurry home. The shining balloons flew around the room. Ji Hoon was sleeping soundly in his bed. Cherin noticed that her father's eyes had recovered. She wanted to treat them to about +2. But she realized that there were other parts of the body as well. The shining book was hovering over Cherin. She couldn't decide whether to treat her tummy or her face. The girl reached for the book. It was impossible to treat everything at the same time, otherwise Daddy's body would not be able to cope. Then Cherin happily decided to make Daddy's skin beautiful. She put her shining palms on her husband's face and told his skin to get better. She sat over Ji Hoon and asked his skin to shine so that Daddy would be beautiful, beautiful. Cherin clapped her hands and said that was all for today. She said good night to her daddy, who was glowing, and went to bed. The next day after the news of Chan Dong-ho's arrest, the weather was fine outside. Ji Hoon was reading the news and hoped that the professor would be jailed for 30 years. The man stretched out in his chair and decided to start looking for research positions. He looked at Cherin, who was sitting on the bed reading a book. Ji Hoon thought that in addition to work, he needed to start teaching the girl, at least to understand what and how to teach her. He taught Cherin almost everything from the scientific field. Only art and sports remained. But given the fact that the girl does not want to study with anyone but her dad, Ji Hoon opened a search and decided to buy a musical instrument for Cherin. Maybe she would be interested in playing. Suddenly, he saw something that would fit the bill. It was a portable piano. Ji Hoon decided that it was perfect because it would not disturb him at home, and Cherin had been interested in the piano last time, so she would like it. The man realized that without him, the girl would not want to learn, so he looked for a video to learn something himself. A few days passed. Ji Hoon sat at his instrument and played a melody. Cherin was impressed and said that her dad was the best. The man rubbed his forehead and proudly said that he could play such an easy melody with his eyes closed. The girl did not know that he was secretly practicing. Cherin enthusiastically said that she wanted to play just like her daddy. The man was glad that she had finally developed an interest in the piano. Ji Hoon sat little Cherin on a chair and began to explain that each key had a different sound, and they started with the white ones and learned the notes. Cherin memorized everything carefully. It was as if Ji Hoon was explaining how the words of the song would sound in the names of the notes. Cherin was happy. She played the easy song that Ji Hoon had learned. The man was amazed. He had just taught her the notes and she could play the song. He asked how she was able to play it so well the first time, if she had studied before. Cherin happily replied that she was just following her dad's lead and asked if she played well. Then he surprisingly started teaching her how to play a song with black keys. The girl happily said that she would repeat it now. And, not surprisingly, she succeeded the first time. Ji Hoon looked at her and realized that Cherin was not just a genius. He considered her the genius of the century. The man mentioned the Renaissance genius Leonardo da Vinci. He was educated in all fields. Perhaps Cherin was just as brilliant. Ji Hoon imagined that in a few years Cherin would have comprehended all the truths of this world. He imagined Cherin calling herself the goddess of truth. The man realized that it would never come to that, no matter how brilliant she was. He looked at the girl playing the piano. Ji Hoon knew that the girl's genius was beyond his reach. It was a pity to waste her talents. Cherin was happy to do anything if only they could do it together. He imagined the girl making a human sculpture out of sand. There was nothing wrong with her succeeding in sand modeling faster than her peers. Suddenly, his thought was shattered. It was impossible to think about this. Among a population of 7 million, such a person is very rare. You can't waste such a talent on digging in the mud. Ji Hoon could not let it go. Someone was not happy. Jiangsu repeated Ji Hoon's question about what to do with Cherin. They were standing in the corridor of the university. Ji Hoon replied, "Isn't it obvious that the loss of a genius like Cherin would be a huge loss for humanity?" Then Jiangsu asked if Ji Hoon hadn't said that he wouldn't force her to do anything she didn't want to do. Ji Hoon was surprised. It was true. Then Jiangsu said that the man's words sounded like he was ready to force Cherin to do something. He told Ji Hoon to leave the girl alone. When she wants to, she will find something to do. Ji Hoon was surprised. He hadn't thought about it and thanked his friend for his advice. Jiangsu laughed and said that he was Cherin's uncle, so he should be the one to give advice. Ji Hoon was outraged. He didn't remember Cherin having such a lousy uncle, and especially since the man didn't agree with him. Jiangsu was also outraged, because he was giving advice like an uncle, and Ji Hoon was just using it. The man thanked him for the advice, but he was not Jiangsu's uncle. Jiangsu said that being like Ji Hoon was bad, otherwise Cherin would only learn bad things from him. Ji Hoon asked Jiangsu what he had said. He quickly said that he was receiving a call, ran away from Ji Hoon, and promised to return when he answered it. The man thought that his friend always knew how to ruin everything. However, Jang-soo helped him understand something. Without realizing it, Ji Hoon almost started to force Cherin to study under the pretext of wasting his talent. He remembered Cherin's smiling face. He might be able to raise an incredible genius by teaching her everything, but if it was against her will, she would be miserable. Ji Hoon smiled and looked out the window. He remembered Yona's words that what matters most is what Cherin thinks. Suddenly, Jang-soo ran up to him and asked if he knew Professor Choi Woo-suk. Ji Hoon did know him. Jang-soo embarrassedly told him that he had recently talked to him and accidentally blurted out Ji Hoon and Ji Jin. Now the professor wanted to meet them. Chang-soo asked if his friend was okay with it. Ji Hoon was surprised to hear that he wanted to meet with Cherin. Jang-soo asked if Ji Hoon had signed up for the professor's class. He had, but Jang-soo didn't let him finish. He told him to meet the professor because it would be nice to get to know each other before the semester started. Professor Choi Woo specialized in neuroscience and was known for his good-naturedness and high intelligence. Ji Hoon had heard that the professor was currently conducting research in the field of artificial intelligence, and the man did not understand why he needed to see him. Ji Hoon thought that there was really nothing wrong with meeting him, and Cherin would be happy to go with her father. And in principle, the professor was not a bad person, so nothing bad could happen. Ji Hoon invited Jang-soo to go out to eat. He was buying. The man gladly agreed. The day of the meeting with Professor Choi Udak came. There was a shout of joy. It was Cherin, who was excited to finally go to the university with her dad. Suddenly she looked back at her dad and asked if Professor Choi Woo-sang had bullied him. Ji Hoon was a little embarrassed. He thought about how he had only taken one of his classes during his university days. He thought that he had tried very hard in class, but the professor had given him only a B+. And when he came to the professor to ask the reason, he angrily replied that this was his maximum grade. At that moment, Ji Hoon regretted taking his course. If you think about it, the professor didn't look good even then. Suddenly, Cherin asked why her dad wasn't answering her. Ji Hoon replied, embarrassed, that he was just thinking about something. He said he couldn't get a good grade from him, but the professor was a good person. Ji Hoon, very excited, asked Cherin not to worry. He was only thinking about not embarrassing himself in the interview. In the office, there were various statues on the tables. Ji Hoon and Cherin politely greeted the professor and the girl introduced herself. Choi Woo-hyuk smiled. He had heard from Ji Hoon's friends about Cherin. The professor called the girl a real beauty. He invited them to the table, Ji Hoon thanked them, and Cherin was happy to have cookies. The girl took the cookies and thanked the professor. Choi Woo-hyuk smiled and told Ji Hoon that with a daughter like that, every day must be filled with happiness. The man embarrassedly replied that it was true. Even in difficult moments, just looking at Cherin fills him with strength. Then he asked why the professor had invited them. The professor asked if he knew the topic of his research. Ji Hoon replied that he was not familiar with the details, but as far as he knew, it had something to do with artificial intelligence. The professor said that this was true, and he believes that the key to creating true artificial intelligence lies in the human brain. Specifically, in the brain of a child. It was as if Ji Hoon was struck by lightning. He realized that the professor wanted to use Cherin as a model for experiments. The cookies on the plate gradually shrank. The first time Choi Woo-hyuk heard about Cherin was from Professor Baek Nahi. She said that she had seen an incredibly brilliant child and decided to consult him about this child's participation in the Olympiad. Ji Hoon was surprised. The professor went on to say that he had been supervising the Olympiad for 3 years. And he has been studying artificial intelligence for almost as long. He was interested in the children who scored the highest score at the Olympiad. But despite their intelligence, they were not in the right age category, so he began to despair. Cherin continued to eat the cookies. Just then, the professor brought him Cherin's results. He was going to make an appointment right away, but as luck would have it, he had trouble with Jang Dong-ho. Ji Hoon smiled. His professor didn't like Jang Dong-ho either. The professor sighed. Not long ago, he had learned about Cherin from Jiangsu and asked him to extend his invitation. He said that only if Ji Hoon and his daughter didn't mind, he would like Cherin to be the subject of his research, and asked what they thought about it. The father and daughter were surprised. Ji Hong asked if it was safe. The professor replied that it was safe and that Ji Hong should also participate. In any case, he would not be able to harm the child in the presence of the parents. The professor also suggested that Ji Hong resume his studies at his research center. Ji Hong was surprised. He explained to the professor that his specialty was far from artificial intelligence research and that he would hardly be able to fulfill his duties. The professor was somewhat surprised. He laughed and said that no one could do his job as well as Ji Hong. The professor said that if his memory was correct, they had met in the 3rd year of Ji Hong's tenure. The man said that was indeed the case, and that's when the professor gave him a B+, which is why Ji Hoon thought he had no connection to the professor's specialty. Then Choi Woo-hyuk said that he seemed to have confused Ji Hoon. The professor had never given someone an A. In his opinion, an A is a grade that a student simply cannot get. So he gave Ji Hoon, a student he wanted to grow up to be, a B+. In addition, this grade was supposed to encourage the man to learn science. The professor believed that Ji Hong could become a great man in science. Many people can see the sprouts of a scientist in their student years. Ji Hong's sprouts were strong and green. Then the professor asked Cherin if she didn't agree with his words. The girl hugged her dad and said that he was very smart and good at explaining math. The professor smiled and told Ji Hoon that he had no idea how much he regretted choosing Chan as his mentor. The man embarrassedly said that he had not chosen Professor Chan out of personal sympathy. Choi Woo-suk heard that Ji Hoon had been through a lot. But he decided to give advice that it was not good to humiliate yourself too much. He thought Ji Hoon was a pretty good student, so he asked him to be more confident. Ji Hong didn't know what to say. With the praise he had heard for the first time since he had continued his master's studies, the weight of suspicion slowly dissolved and disappeared. He remembered all the quarrels with Professor Chan. This man had made Ji Hong doubt his doctorate. He made him think that all professors use students for their own benefit. Ji Hong loved learning. Perhaps under Professor Choi's guidance, he could get tenure and concentrate on research again. Ji Hong thanked the professor and asked him to take care of him in that case. Then the professor also asked him. He did not want to be delayed and suggested starting this week. The professor assured him that Ji Hong would not regret this experience. It was already evening outside. Pink and orange clouds hung over the buildings. When they left, Cherin asked her father if they would have to go to university every day. Ji Hoon replied that not every day, but often enough, and asked if Cherin had changed her mind. But Cherin hadn't changed her mind. She liked doing everything with her dad, because the professor said that her dad would also be involved. Suddenly, Ji Hoon had a change of heart. He said that he couldn't go with her because of class. Cherin was frozen with horror. Suddenly, Ji Hong had a change of heart. He said that because of the fumes, he would not be able to walk with Cherin. The girl was numb with terror. She began to say in anxiety that the professor had said she would be with her dad. Ji Hong began to say, with mock sadness, that he was going to tell the professor anyway, that it would be difficult for him to participate. Cherin began to cry. She did not want to go alone. Suddenly her tearful eyes shone with surprise. Ji Hong said that he was joking, because how could he send her alone? He picked her up in his arms. Cherin asked if her dad was lying to calm her down. The man told her not to worry. He would see her through. He asked if she really didn't want to leave her daddy that badly. Cherin replied that of course she did. She asked him not to joke like that anymore, because she would get offended. Ji Hoon apologized, asked her not to be angry, and said he would buy her something delicious. He carried her in his arms. Cherin snorted and said she wanted pizza. The blue sky stretched over the university building. The professor was incredibly happy. He knew that Ji Hoon and Cherin were coming. He was very happy to see them. Ji Hoon thanked Choi Woo-suk for his hospitality and asked him what Cherin should do. The professor was holding a book on higher mathematics. He planned to model artificial intelligence through learning. As the professor had said earlier, Ji Hoon had to be there during every process. Cherin couldn't contain her joy because her dad would be with her. She breathed out a sigh of relief because she was starting to worry about being alone. Choi Woo-hyuk told her not to worry because her dad would always be there for her. The professor adjusted his glasses and said it was time to start the exam. Cherin solved the problems. The professor explained that the main purpose of the study was to explore the limits of brain activity during Cherin's learning. The woman explained to Cherin how to solve the problems. The professor used a high school curriculum as the basis for the intelligence test. Together with him, Cherin's learning speed reached incredible heights. Ji Hoon looked at his daughter. He had tried so hard to put her off school, but it made no sense when she was picking up everything on the fly. Choi Woo-hyuk walked over to Ji Hoon and asked him if he thought that Cherin was incredible as well. If he succeeds in modeling the girl's brain, the age of artificial intelligence will come 10 years earlier. The professor seemed to be burning with joy. Cherin is the first person who has managed to rekindle his research spirit recently. One meeting in 2 to 3 days was not enough. The professor wanted to have them every day. Suddenly, Ji Hoon apologized for interrupting the professor's burning aspirations, but there was no way to see him every day. Choi Woo-hee was desperate. Ji Hoon explained that he was starting classes next week, and Cherin was only willing to go with him. The professor laughed. He understood that the girl loved her dad very much, but he was sure he could convince her. Ji Hoon was embarrassed, and he explained that it was hardly possible. Choi Woo-hyuk didn't understand how it was impossible. There was no such word in his vocabulary. For Cherin's sake, the professor was ready to change the entire interior of the laboratories. The professor hung balloons and toys all over his office. Cherin thought it was boring. Choi Woo-hyuk didn't understand, because yesterday she had said something completely different. The girl explained that she was not interested in anything without her dad. Cherin threw her arms around her father. Ji Hoon decided to warn the professor that he was graduating in June and was planning to get a job as a researcher at a private company. Therefore, the professor could only conduct experiments until then. Choi Woo-hyuk was stunned. He said that these experiments would take at least a year. Ji Hoon replied in embarrassment that, as the professor could see, Cherin didn't want to come to the institute without him. The dejected professor told the man that their Neuroinformation Technology Research Center needed researchers. Ji Hoon was surprised. This was the first time he had heard about it and asked how long the position had been available. Choi Woo-tae said that it had been available since that very moment and handed Ji Hoon a sheet to sign. The man did not expect such a suddenness. Suddenly, Ji Hoon looked at the document. It was a placement under Professor Choi Woo-hyuk. Only one signature was needed for Ji Hoon to be accepted. The professor adjusted his glasses and promised to give him a research assistantship for his participation in research. It was a very attractive offer. Ji Hoon thanked him for his concern, but his future depended on this decision. He needed to think about it. Choi Woo-suk looked at Ji Hoon pleadingly and said that he had agreed to work under him last time, but now he was saying the opposite. The professor looked in Cherin's direction and said that it was unlikely that other research centers would look at Ji Hoon's circumstances the same way he did. Ji Hoon agreed, but there was a place he wanted to go. The professor explained that, of course, the salaries at a university center are not as high as at private research centers. But in exchange, they can give him free time. They will not keep him with Cherin for 12 hours a day. Choi Woo-hyuk approached Cherin and asked her what she would like more, either to spend more time with her dad or for her dad to earn more money. Of course, she wanted to play with her dad. Her family was rich, so it was no big deal if her dad's salary was low. Ji Hoon thought that even participating in research takes no more than 3 hours a day. Then he is free. But he also had an offer from Hutch, so it was very difficult to make a decision right away. Choi Woo-hyuk told the man that nowhere else in Korea would he be so welcomed. But the professor realized from Ji Hoon's face that he had not convinced him. Choi Woo-hyuk adjusted his glasses and asked Ji Hoon not to blame himself, because it was the professor's fault that he was not convinced. Ji Hoon was surprised. The professor told Cherin that it was unfortunate that her father had chosen money over time with her. The girl was shocked. She couldn't believe it. Choi Woo-hyuk said that he, as a professor, did not have enough to support Ji Hoon. Cherin asked why her dad didn't want to spend much time with her. Ji Hoon, depressed, could not understand at what point everything had taken a wrong turn. The professor told the man to forget about the proposal and pretend it never happened. Ji Hoon was surprised when the professor took the contract away. Choi Woo-hyuk said that it was a burden for him to open an unplanned vacancy now, and Ji Hoon had lost his only chance to spend free time with his daughter. Cherin was indignant and said that her dad was a bad person. Ji Hoon stopped the professor. Almost crying, the girl said that she was having fun doing experiments with her dad, and he wanted to go somewhere else. Ji Hoon looked at the document and said angrily that he would sign it. Choi Woo-hyuk smiled. He thought it was a very good decision and called Ji Hoon to come over to his place to fill out the form. Cherin was happy. Ji Hoon felt like he was being forced into this. Even though Hutch had just been offered the job and it was not certain that he would be able to accept it. It's not that he wasn't interested in the field of artificial intelligence at all. Ji Hoon filled out the form under Cherin's watchful eye. The main thing was that he would be able to watch Cherin grow up. He thought it was the right choice. That's how Ji Hoon entrusted Professor Choi Woo-sang with his future. And his experiments continued quietly. Choi Woo-hee offered Cherin different ways of learning and situations. He wanted to study and model all the reactions of her brain. A bunch of rose petals flew in the air. Ji Hoon wished Cherin good luck on the exam. He said that it was okay if she made a mistake and asked her not to worry too much about it. A happy Cherin said she would do well, because she was his daughter. Finally, it was time for the Olympiad among gifted children that Professor Choi Woo-hee was waiting for. Cherin waved to her dad and asked him to promise to have fun with her if she did well in the exams. As usual, it was very sunny outside. Ji Hoon entered the university when he suddenly saw Choi Woo-suk. The professor told him to hurry up and go. He asked with a smile if Cherin was nervous, because it was very exciting to take an exam with other people for the first time. Ji Hoon smiled and replied that Cherin seemed very calm to him. He didn't know who had such nerves. Choi Woo-hyuk remarked that Cherin definitely took after her father, because he had heard about Ji Hoon's speech to the Hatch Company CEO. Ji Hoon was embarrassed, saying that the professor hadn't been there because he was overwhelmed that day and had spoken out of turn. By the way, the man asked the professor to reconsider the decision about today's lecture with the high school students. Choi Woo-hee replied that he thought Ji Hoon was qualified enough. The man embarrassedly explained that in his current state, he might say something stupid and that would undermine the image of the institute. The professor replied that there is a high probability that thoughtlessly spoken words are what make the most sense. And if you are nervous and don't really know anything, you won't even be able to say these words. The professor asked Ji Hoon to think about the report to Hutch. He asked if there were many people who asked questions because they didn't understand the meaning. Ji Hoon thought about it. There were none. Choi Woo-hyuk smiled and said that this was proof of the success of his report. If Ji Hoon didn't know how to do them, Jang-soo wouldn't have praised him. Ji Hoon thanked him, but his slurred speech was not a good report. Choi Woo-hyuk touched his shoulder and said that he shouldn't say that there was nothing to work on. But you need to move forward, and very rarely do you get a good chance for development. That is why the professor asked Ji Hoon to give a lecture. He believed that Ji Hoon would be a valuable staff member who was worthy of representing the research center. He asked Ji Hoon to be more confident. He smiled and understood. He promised to do his best. The professor entrusted Ji Hoon to give a lecture on artificial intelligence at a local school. He put something in his mouth and convinced himself that he could do it. The woman on stage asked to greet the professor with applause. Ji Hoon walked on stage in embarrassment. There were many more people than he had expected. And besides, The children who applauded seemed to have sucked out his soul. If Ji Hoon let them be sad even a little bit, they would fall asleep. The man smiled confidently. He had prepared a trump card that would not leave anyone indifferent. Not a single applicant. Ji Hoon greeted the students and introduced himself. He said he worked at a research center for neuroinformation technology. He asked who knew where their institute was located. The students did not seem interested. They did not understand where Ji Hoon worked and would rather sleep. The name was new to the students. But Ji Hoon held up his hand and said that their center was located in the most prestigious place in their country, the Korean University. The students began to whisper. It was the first time they had heard the name, so at first they thought it was some small university. Ji Hoon continued his lecture. He said that their research center had prepared a lecture that would tell them a way to improve their grades. The students began to discuss Ji Hoon's words even more. They realized that with this knowledge they would be able to take the top places in the ranking. Ji Hoon expected this. The best bait for students is entrance exams and grades. He managed to attract attention, so it was time to start the lecture. Ji Hoon explained to the interested students that the brain is responsible for learning. Their center studies the connection between the brain and the computer. The man explained that the goal of artificial intelligence research is to create a mechanism that can think like a human, overcoming basic algorithms. It will be able to analyze and predict academic progress just like a teacher. After a while, the entire room sat with interested eyes. Ji Hoon thought that he had built the lecture on the connection between the purpose of the research and its results with academic achievement. In this way, he had achieved the absolute attention of the students. Then Ji Hoon decided to end the lecture with one of Chang Su's roasts. He said that he was finishing his master's degree and preparing to write his doctorate. He began to explain the difference in a joke and compared the master's and doctoral degrees to Kachari and Mujinji. In any case, you will have to languish in research. The students didn't get the joke. They thought it was a kind of humor from the students of Korea University. Ji Hoon was almost crying. He blamed himself for trusting Jiangsu. He said he was waiting for questions from anyone who was interested in the research center. After a few questions, Ji Hoon finished his lecture. After a while, the woman who had introduced Ji Hoon at the beginning thanked him for today's lecture. The man replied that there was no need to thank him and that he was happy that the children had listened attentively. The woman said that it was the first time she had ever seen them behave so well during a lecture. No one was napping, they asked a lot of questions, and it was all thanks to an interesting lecture. A woman remarked on the last joke and laughed softly. A very embarrassed Ji Hoon was also sorry for her. The woman thanked Ji Hoon again for the great lecture and said that they would love to have the opportunity to meet him again. Ji Hoon returned to the university. He was happy because it was the first time he had given such a successful lecture. Presentations always depressed him, but success was very uplifting. He thought about accepting if he was asked to give another lecture. Ji Hoon was happy that everything had worked out. He was walking down the hall and remembered Cherin's exam. He had heard that the questions were really difficult this time. He was worried that she might cry because of the results, because she was still young and it was her first exam, which made it even more exciting. Ji Hoon opened the door. He told Cherin that he was back and asked her how she had passed the exam, but suddenly he was stunned. Cherin sat next to the upset professor with her head in her lap. Ji Hoon was frightened. He ran up to her and asked the professor what had happened, if Cherin had failed the exam. Choi Woo-hyuk scratched the back of his head and replied that the questions were harder this time, but he didn't expect it to be that hard. He said that Cherin had handed in her exam paper when not even an hour had passed and had been sitting here all this time. Cherin looked up, crying, and turned to her father. He said that Cherin had handed in her exam paper when not even an hour had passed and she had been sitting here all this time. Cherin looked up with tearful eyes and turned to her father. The man was surprised at how quickly the girl passed the exam. Choi Woo-hyuk explained that she had completed the paper in 45 minutes and that he had personally checked it. Cherin covered her eyes with her hands. Ji Hoon wondered how hard the assignments were that the girl handed in the paper in 45 minutes. Was it really that difficult for a child who was taking an exam for the first time? Ji Hoon hugged Cherin and asked her if she was sad because of the difficult exam. He took pity on her. The girl purred and replied that it was honestly very difficult. Cherin was worried that the other children would be upset because she had made up her mind so early. Ji Hoon looked at her in surprise. He asked her what it meant. Cherin smiled happily. Choi Woo-hyuk smiled and replied that she really did leave the office, having completed the work so quickly. Cherin smiled and said that the problems were easy. She solved them in 30 minutes and spent the remaining 15 minutes checking. She smiled at her dad and asked him to praise her. Ji Hoon was embarrassed when he heard how fast Cherin had done the work. He patted his daughter's head. Choi Woo-hyuk handed Ji Hoon the letter with Cherin's decisions so he could see for himself. The man was surprised. The problems were designed for at least 3 to 4 years of university. All of Cherin's answers were correct. Choi Woo-hyuk smiled and noted that even the solutions were perfect. Ji Hoon finally understood everything. They decided to play a prank on him. Cherin replied that last time, Daddy played a joke on her, and this time, she played a joke on Daddy. Ji Hoon scratched the back of his head. He didn't even realize it at first and let himself be tricked. Choi Woo-hyuk said that Cherin's abilities were beyond their expectations. He asked if Ji Hoon knew the 20th century geniuses von Neumann and William Sidis. The man answered embarrassedly that he was familiar with these names. Neumann, at the age of 5, divided 8-digit numbers in his mind, and Sidis, at the age of 8, knew math better than his father, who was a Harvard professor. Cherin had abilities that exceeded these two geniuses. If she was properly educated, the girl could change world history. It was impressive for Ji Hoon to hear this. Choi Woo-suk patted him on the shoulder and asked him to raise Cherin well and to find her ma'am as soon as possible. Ji Hoon replied in despair that it was not that easy. Choi Woo-hyuk looked at him intently. The professor said that the man had been looking better lately and asked if he had started taking care of his skin. Ji Hoon said he hadn't done anything. Choi Woo-hyun then asked why his skin had improved. The professor honestly said that he had overheard the students talking. They were saying that Ji Hoon had started taking care of himself because he was going to get married. The man was stunned by what he heard. Ji Hoon asked about the protection of his privacy. Choi Woo-hyuk said that he didn't think the research center had that kind of protection. Rumors spread instantly if they have nothing to do with research. Ji Hoon was confused and asked what marriage had to do with it. The professor asked if he was really watching himself because of such an event. The man replied that there was no woman who would agree. The professor was surprised. He couldn't understand why Ji Hoon was looking better. Cherin listened to them attentively and with interest. She said it was all thanks to the massage she gives her dad every night. She promised to make him very handsome. Choi Woo-hyuk was surprised. He said that if he were Ji Hoon, he would have rejuvenated 20 years by looking at Cherin. Ji Hoon realized that the professor did not believe him. Choi Woo-hyuk asked him not to do anything that would affect Cherin's state of mind. He said that Ji Hoon was fine without a woman. The professor smiled and told the man that he was asking for his skin because of the girl. He didn't care about Ji Hoon's personal life, but if it was bad for Cherin, he would talk differently. Ji Hoon said that he should find something to do. The professor told him that there was nothing like that in the center and that he had to find something himself. The man was almost crying. As Ji Hoon expected, he was just a trailer trash Cherin. Ji Hoon thought that the rumors about his wedding would quickly disappear, but he was wrong. The man was looking at something very carefully and thinking. He was looking at Ji Hoon and it was bothering him a little bit. The man asked what Ji Hoon was doing with his skin and asked if he was really going to get married. Ji Hoon was outraged. He would not leave Cherin for some woman. He just had no reason to be stressed lately. The man noticed that Ji Hoon had decided to become a researcher. And Professor Choi Woo-hyuk has prepared a place for him. Now he doesn't have to worry about grades. He envied him. Ji Hoon replied that there was nothing to be jealous of because he also had doubts. The man said that Ji Hoon's only concern was attendance. If he doesn't skip, then he has the place in his pocket. Ji Hoon replied that life doesn't end with being a researcher and that he needs to think about what to do later. The research center offered him good conditions, and he joined it, but he needs to think about what to do next. It is still much more profitable to participate in private research. The man told Ji Hoon that there was nowhere else to resolve the issue with the army, and he was jealous that Ji Hoon could afford such thoughts. Nevertheless, Ji Hoon's struggles to find something to do after the service were real. After all, the artificial intelligence research at Professor Choi Woity's center did not match his specialty. He wondered if he had made the right choice in choosing to work there. From the very beginning, Ji Hoon wanted to study a little under the professor's guidance before graduation. The man went outside. Still, the best solution was to get a job in a large company. But he had heard that lately they had been resigning employees very quickly. Ji Hoon sighed. He had never worked. And maybe he should have stayed in the center. He thought he had already made up his mind, but the thoughts continued to torment him. Suddenly, someone spoke to him. It was the manager, Yen. He said he was glad to see Ji Hoon and asked how he was doing. Ji Hoon greeted him in surprise and asked why Yang was here. He replied that he was here for work. Ji Hoon asked if it was related to some new project. Mr. Yang smiled and replied that it was partly because of that. He had a conversation with Ji Hoon and offered to have a cup of coffee. Ji Hoon was surprised. Yang smiled and said that he wanted to call Ji Hoon, but they were lucky enough to meet. He said that the coffee was on him and asked if the man had a minute to spare. Ji Hoon realized that the only thing they could talk about was the research assistant position. He thought that Yang wanted to offer it to him again. He thought that if it was really about that, now was the time to make a decision. Ji Hoon agreed to the conversation. The men entered a coffee shop. They were sitting at a table discussing Hatch's plans to concentrate on manufacturing machinery in a fourth facility. Yang asked if Ji Hoon had thought about his proposal. The man was surprised. Yang's supervisor reminded him that they would be accepting applications to join their research study at the end of April. Ji Hoon was nervous. He thought it was very strange, because Yang sounded serious. Almost 3 months had passed since then. Yang remembered what had happened so long ago. He probably had a good opinion of Ji Hoon. The man thought that it was much more profitable for him to work for the Hatch Corporation. Besides, he could develop his profession there. But he remembered Cherin. She would have been happy with any choice he made, as long as he stayed close to her. Ji Hoon thanked Yang's boss for the offer, but he had already found something else to do. Yang was surprised and asked if other companies were also accepting applications. Ji Hoon embarrassedly explained that he had originally planned to work for Hatch Corporation, but decided to get a doctorate at his professor's institute. He planned to get professional training there. Yang was a little upset. He wanted to work with Ji Hoon. But still, he congratulated the man on a very wonderful opportunity. Ji Hoon thanked him. He thought it was a pity, of course, but as soon as he made the decision, it was like a weight was lifted from his soul. He thought it was the end of his relationship with the corporation. Ji Hoon thanked Nu for the coffee, and Nu wished Ji Hoon a safe journey. At least Ji Hoon thought that was the end of it. Manager Yang looked at Ji Hoon in surprise and asked what he was doing here. The man embarrassedly explained that the professor he was talking about yesterday was Director Choi Woo-sang. Then he asked what brought Yang here. He explained that he was in the process of signing a cooperation agreement with this company. They were going to be the first to make a real assistant with artificial intelligence. Ji Hoon thought it was amazing that they kept seeing each other. Then Yang remarked that maybe Ji Hoon was destined to work with them. There was no way to be sure that he wouldn't be part of the corporation in a few years. Ji Hoon was embarrassed to hear that. He wondered if Yang was really offering to be their potential scout. He imagined himself as one of the employees of the best corporation in Korea. Just the thought of it was exciting. It was a beautiful dream. Ji Hoon thought that he shouldn't think too far ahead. He would be very disappointed if he was just imagining things. In any case, he continued his ties with the Hatch Corporation. The flowers were already in full bloom. The end of April was approaching. And after it, summer. The people around us were looking at something in wonder. Cherin asked her father if he was having a hard time. He was carrying a rather big girl in his arms and said that it was not hard for him at all. He liked to carry her and hug her like that. They would get lost around the campus, attracting unwanted attention. That's why Ji Hoon didn't carry her here, not because he didn't care about his daughter. He was not comfortable with it. The weather was getting warmer and more students came out to look at Cherin. It was nothing more than the struggle of a depressed father for the safety of his child. Carrying Cherin in his arms meant not letting the students surround her. The man leaned tiredly against the wall. He hoped no one would come here. Cherin thought it was quite difficult for her dad. Ji Hoon was hurt by the fact that he was finding it difficult to carry his daughter in his arms, even though she had grown up a little. Perhaps it was a sign that he needed to take up spotting. Suddenly, Jang-soo ran up to them. He happily told Cherin that her uncle was here and offered her a hug. The girl stopped him and told him that her daddy told her that if she came close to Chang-soo, she would get the disease stupid. Chang-soo was surprised. He had no idea what this meant, because he was a university student after all. Ji Hoon patted Jang Il-'s head and praised him. He told his friend to just think about his behavior. Jang-soo got angry and asked him to introduce him to Cherin normally. Ji Hoon indignantly agreed. The man told his daughter that Jang-soo was a talented student at the best university in Korea and that he was a genius and wanted to teach the girl many things. Cherin smiled and asked the surprised man what exactly he wanted to teach her. Jang-soo called Ji Hoon very rude. He would also have to have a child to say something like that to Ji Hoon. Suddenly, Ji Hoon said that In-jong and her friends were walking behind Jang-soo. The man looked back in surprise. The woman asked how long they had been waiting. Jang-soo smiled and said that they had just arrived, but the woman rushed to the surprised Cherin and said that she was getting prettier and prettier with every meeting. She hugged the girl, who didn't really like it. In-jong was a friend from the student club. Ji Hoon didn't know much about women's clothing, so he needed her help in choosing clothes for Cherin. Jang-soo told In-jong to stop bothering the girl and introduce her friends, because they were embarrassed to be standing there. She introduced the women who were supposed to help with the shopping. The short woman with blonde hair was Hwang Soo-young, and the tall, black-haired woman was Kim Tae-young. In-jong introduced Ji Hoon as a man who had suddenly become a father and Jang-soo as a man who was still a child. Jang-soo was outraged. He asked what kind of impression people would have after that. In-jong indignantly replied that she had just told the truth. Then she introduced the surprised Cherin, about whom the woman had talked so much. The women were amazed at the girl's beauty. Cherin embarrassedly hugged her father, who covered her with his arm. Jang-soo thought it was strange for him to feel unwanted. Ji Hoon thanked the women for agreeing to help. Cherin needed to update her wardrobe and had no idea where to go. In-jong replied that when it came to Cherin, she couldn't refuse to help. It was her duty as the president of Cherin's fan club. Ji Hoon was surprised. In-jong said that it wasn't official yet, but since he was her father, she would tell him. She pulled out a strange plastic stick that looked like a microphone, but with half an orange on top. The woman began to say that in order to be useful and to make the world filled with love and peace, every home should have a child like Cherin. Her friends got the same strange accessories, and In-jong proclaimed the official name of Cherin's fan club as Vitamin C. Ji Hoon was surprised and embarrassed.